Anime autopsy here, and we need to have a conversation about death in One Piece because I am genuinely convinced that this community has fallen off a cliff and snapped its neck on the way down. Every single week since Wano, I watch the exact same discourse respawn in the comments like a Logia user. Stakes are dead. Oda's a coward. No body, no death. They're definitely alive. It's noise. It's all noise. And listen to me. I need you to be honest with yourself for 2 seconds. You have absolutely doom-posted that Pell should have stayed dead. You have absolutely seen a silhouette get sliced off screen and gone, oh, they're fine. Oda doesn't kill anyone. Meanwhile, someone else in the same thread is rage-quitting because Kinemon just got bisected for the 3rd time and still somehow has a punch card for the afterlife. This is normal. This is the current mental health status of the fandom. Here's the thing. The chaos is not random. On one side, you've got weekly readers screaming that every fake out from Alabasta to Egghead proves the story has no consequences. On the other, you've got people insisting that every off-screen explosion, every submerged ship, every panel where a character is merely implied to be paste is secretly a survival flag. Pell memes. Pagaya memes. Bon Clay dies more often than most side characters speak. The comment sections have become a mass graveyard of bad genre literacy. But the problem isn't just that fans are arguing. The problem is what they're arguing about. Everyone's debating vibes. Nobody is actually mapping the pattern. We throw around stakes and narrative weight, and Oda never kills anyone, as if those are objective categories. But almost nobody is sitting down and asking, when does this author intentionally choose death? And when is he very deliberately choosing the illusion of death? What is the difference on the page between Ace and Pell? Between Oden and Orochi? Between Sabo's boat and a CP0 agent getting facelessly erased? So I did the thing you're not supposed to do if you want to remain a well-adjusted human being. I tracked every single fake-out death in One Piece. All of them. From East Blue Nobody's face down in the ocean, to Pell hugging a nuke, to Kanjuro and Orochi speedrunning the concept of final boss execution in Wano, all the way to Egghead's conveniently obscured casualties. I built a spreadsheet, multiple tabs, color coding. At a certain point, I stopped feeling like a critic and more like a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. And this is not a sin. This is fine. Because once you line them up, a system appears. Oda has rules. They're flexible, they're abusable, but they're rules. There is a planned, repeatable method to who gets a funeral, who gets a cover story, who gets a gag resurrection, and who just quietly stops existing. By the end of this video, you will know exactly which deaths were lies, which corpses are real, and which dead characters might still be walking around the One Piece world right now. And once you see that pattern, you will never read a death scene in this series the same way again. So, yes, the video is over 2 hours. I know, I see the timestamp too. I need you to understand. If you actually want to track every fake death, every near death, the body was never found from East Blue all the way to Wano and Egghead. You do not do that in a tight 20 minutes and a dream. You do that in a mildly unhinged dissertation with pictures. Because here's the thing, the community keeps mashing all of this into one big complaint. Pell lives. Same category as Pagaya getting zapped by Enel. Same category as Sabo dying in a flashback. Same category as Kanjuro's 7th encore performance in Wano. And when you treat all of those as the same narrative sin, you miss what the author is actually doing. Not every not dead is the same tool. Not every survival is the same problem. So the core thesis of this whole monstrosity is simple. We need to separate the tools. There are intentional fake deaths, where Oda is absolutely dangling a corpse in front of you for hype or heartbreak. There are narrative deaths, where the person is biologically fine, but functionally gone from the story. And there are survivable injuries, where the fandom collectively decided someone was dead, because we are pattern-seeking monkeys who see funerals in every explosion panel. Those are three different categories. They have different rules, different foreshadowing, different payoffs. To prove that, I'm going arc by arc, character by character, with receipts. I'm talking panels, SBS quotes, cover stories, author comments when we have them. We're not just yelling Pell bad for 2 hours, we're asking what did Oda show, what did he not show, and what did he later have to quietly fix in a corner. Pagaya's lightning strike, Bon Clay's final sacrifice in Impel Down, pound face down in the dirt, Conjuro's curtain calls, that CP0 agent in Wano who definitely should have been paced under Kaido's club, but mysteriously was not. Each one gets tagged and filed. Why does this matter? Because if we don't define what counts as a fake death, a narrative death, and a survivable injury, every argument about stakes in One Piece is meaningless noise. You cannot talk about Ace, Whitebeard, Odin, Yasui, and then in the same breath scream that no one ever dies, because Pell ate a nuke and walked it off. That's not analysis. That's vibes. This is fine for Twitter. This is not fine if you care about storytelling. And listen to me. This is not a sin on your part. This is normal. Oda's weekly cliffhanger culture is designed to weaponize ambiguity. Off-screen deaths, silhouettes, no corpse, sudden cutaways, then a cover story 6 months later where the dead guy is making bread. But once you actually map the pattern, something interesting happens. Some of the people you've quietly filed under confirmed dead do not meet Oda's own death rules. No body, no funeral, no grave, no cover story epilogue, and a suspicious amount of unresolved foreshadowing. I'm going to flag those as we hit them. I'm not promising everyone is alive. I am saying there are a few corpses the story has never actually produced. And the further we go, the more one question is going to haunt you. If Oda has been this consistent about death, what does that say about the characters who died off screen and never got closure? So before we start exhuming bodies, we need to agree on what a body even is in this story. Because right now, the community throws every they survived moment into one giant Pell-shaped trash can. And listen to me, that's not helping anyone. Here's the thing. Oda is actually very consistent about death. The chaos comes from us mixing 3 different narrative moves into one emotional reaction. So I want a simple model. 3 boxes, 3 coffins, closed coffin, open coffin, no coffin. Closed coffin is the easy one. This is true narrative death. The story zips the bag, shows you the funeral, and then keeps treating that person as gone. Ace's closed coffin. We watch him die, we see the body. We sit through the aftermath in Marineford and the flashbacks, and the grave. Whitebeard is closed coffin. Half his face missing, final stand, literal monument. The author is not winking at you there. That's not foreshadowing a surprise comeback. That's closure. Open coffin is the fake out. The camera frames it as death. The music swells. The sacrifice is presented. But the lid never really locks. Pell is textbook. We get the bomb, the farewell, the shot of the explosion towering over Alabasta. If you were reading weekly, you absolutely thought he was gone. Then a bit later, he strolls back in with some bandages and a shrug. The key is that the author intentionally aimed your brain at he died in the moment, then reversed it. And then there's the chaos gremlin. No coffin. Ambiguous survival. The story never actually says they're dead. No body, no funeral, no narrator box. Just absence. Jin in Bharati disappears coughing on a ship and fandom collectively holds a memorial service anyway. Pagaya in Skypiea gets blasted by Enel and falls. And for years fans filed him under confirmed dead, purely on vibes. The problem isn't that Oda revived them. The problem is that we buried them before the story did. So the real criterion here is intent and framing. Not did I cry, not did Twitter make an edit, But did Oda want you to believe this character was dead at that specific moment? If the answer is yes and they later stand up, that's an open coffin fake out. If the answer is no, and we just projected death onto a missing side character because we are pattern-seeking monkeys who see funerals in every off-screen explosion, that's no coffin. This is not a sin. This is normal. Authors leave gaps. Fans rush to fill them with maximum trauma. But if we want to actually criticize the writing, we need to stop screaming Pell at every unresolved fate and start asking which category we're in. Because once you sort the deaths into closed, open, and none, a weird thing happens. A bunch of the worst offenders vanish, and a much smaller, much sharper pattern of intentional fake-outs appears. And that's what I want to walk you through next. Because once you sort the deaths into closed, open, and none, a weird thing happens. You stop treating Oda as a personal enemy and start seeing the machine he's stuck inside. So we need to talk about that machine. We need to talk about weekly shonen, because if you imagine Oda in a quiet cabin, sipping tea, carefully planning every death with infinite time and zero pressure, congratulations, you've invented fan fiction. The reality is 20 plus years of 15 to 20 pages every single week with an editor breathing down his neck and a magazine that lives or dies on whether you feel compelled to buy the next issue. Here's the thing. In that environment, every chapter needs a hook, not just every arc. Every 20 pages, you need a moment where a teenager in a convenience store goes, "Oh hell, I have to see what happens next." And the cheapest, loudest, most efficient hook in the toolbox is death. X is dead is instant stakes. You do not have to explain it. You do not have to foreshadow it elegantly. Your brain just auto-fills the drama because mortality is the original clickbait. Is that elegant writing? Not necessarily. Is it effective for a weekly magazine that needs spikes in reader surveys and volume sales? Absolutely. When you hit a big arc climax, the temptation to throw 3, 4, 5 apparent deaths at the wall is enormous because each one is a potential you cannot miss next week and stapled directly onto the story. But then you smash into constraint number 2. This is Jump. This is a teen magazine, not a seinen bloodbath. Oda cannot just turn Marineford into berserk with boats, censorship, standards, broadcast partners, toy companies. There is a whole invisible committee whose job is to make sure your 12-year-old cousin does not see Ace's ribcage on a full-page spread. So the author has to imply horror without permanent body horror. People get skewered off panel. Explosions bloom, but the camera cuts away. You see the hat on the ground, not the corpse. And this is not a sin. This is not cowardice in a vacuum. It is a structural problem. You're told, keep the hopeful adventure tone, keep the dream-chasing optimism, but also deliver war and sacrifice, and this time it's serious every other year. If Oda actually confirmed every apparent slaughter, One Piece would have the body count of a small war crime tribunal by Scipio. The series would collapse under its own misery. So he threads the needle. He uses fake-outs, survivals, no body, no death framing as a compromise between weekly hype, censorship, and tone. Sometimes that's planned and thematic. Sometimes it's a lazy cop-out he clearly wrote at 3 a.m. while coughing up blood and instant ramen. And listen to me, if we understand that pressure, we can finally separate those two categories. We can point at a survival and say, this is fine, this is normal for Jump, or no, this one matters, this one is intentional, which is exactly what I want to do when we start walking through the actual fake deaths, from Pell's bomb to the CP0 agent on Egghead, and see which ones hold up under autopsy. So here's where we stop screaming, Pell should have stayed dead, and actually pick up the scalpel. Because when you line up every fake out next to every confirmed corpse, a very boring, very mechanical rule appears. Oda is not mysterious about death. He is bureaucratic about death. Here's the thing. When this author wants you to accept a death as real, he does paperwork. You get the body, you get the ritual, you get the camera lingering long enough that even the most denial-ridden fan has to sit down. Ace doesn't just fall over. We sit on that pierced chest, the blood, the collapse, the cremation, the grave, the sake cups. Whitebeard dies standing, half his face gone, the narrator reading out his battle report. Odin boils, we see the corpse, we see the funeral, we see the shrine. Yasui is executed, body on display, Wano literally stops to mourn. That's not accidental. That's intentional staging. That's Oda going, no, this one counts. The foreshadowing for a real death isn't in some obscure SBS. It's in how obsessively he shows you the remains and then builds a memorial around them. Grave, funeral, named legacy. If those 3 boxes get ticked, you can relax into your grief. It's over. They're not coming back. Now contrast that with the clown show category. The survivals. Pell in a mushroom cloud. Pagaya vanishing in a beam. Sabo's death as a distant ship explosion in a flashback nobody in story actually confirms. Kanjuro and Orochi dying in fire, off-panel, in smoke, in silhouettes, with everybody reacting instead of us seeing a clear corpse. The CP0 agent on Egghead, supposedly vaporized by Buster Call energy, but we never cut to a body, we just cut to a Denden Mushi dropping. Notice the difference? In the fake-outs, the storytelling camera flinches. The death happens behind debris, behind smoke, behind a reaction shot. We get one ambiguous panel and then the plot sprints away. No funeral, no grave, no narrator obituary, just vibes and trauma. And listen to me, Oda almost never gives that detailed, lovingly rendered corpse treatment to anyone he plans to pull out of the hat later. Instead, he weaponizes your pattern-seeking monkey brain that sees Jesus in toast. He shows you a silhouette falling, a pool of blood in long shot, a character screaming, "No!" and he lets you do the rest. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is, in fact, extremely efficient emotional manipulation under weekly magazine constraints. So what do we do with that? We need to start reading future chapters with this rule in the back of our heads. No body, no funeral, no peace. If the death doesn't get procedural weight, you should be suspicious, not devastated. Hold your tears until you see the paperwork. And once you apply that retroactively, a bunch of dead characters in this community's memes suddenly look a lot less dead. In the next section, I want to walk through those case by case and show you who's probably staying buried and who's just waiting for their dramatic re-entry. So let's roll the tape back to where this habit starts, because East Blue is already teaching you the wrong lessons about death. You meet these goofballs, you fall in love with them, and the story keeps screaming, "They're gonna die," and then quietly whispering, "No, they're not. Relax." Zoro versus Mihawk is the first big example. The guy gets run through by the world's strongest swordsman, blood everywhere, collapses into the ocean. The dialogue is framed as a last stand, the music in the anime is doing a funeral, and you, fresh reader, are thinking, oh, this author is brutal. Except here's the thing, there is never a serious procedural moment where anyone checks a pulse, closes his eyes, or even entertains the category of Zoro is dead. He just wakes up on the ship with bandages and a new scar. The story sells danger, not death. Usopp's whole deal in Syrup Village runs on the same fuel. He gets beaten into the dirt by Kuro's crew. We get panels of him sprawled out, motionless, dust in the air. For a second, the camera pretends he's a corpse. Then Oda snaps him back up because the gag requires him to be a coward who survives. You're being trained. Bodies can hit the ground in horrifying ways and still be narratively fine. And Luffy? Luffy dies constantly, drowning under the platform in Arlong Park, sinking away with that serene face, or getting stuck underwater by buggy with a cannonball incoming. The community loves to meme the rubber idiot as unkillable, but that perception is built here. Every time he vanishes under the waves, the paneling pushes you to panic, and every time, someone yanks him out at the last second. This is not a sin. This is normal weekly shonen cliffhanger culture doing its job. Now, Gin, I need you to pay attention to Gin, because he's where the confusion starts. Krieg gasses his own men. Gin breathes in the poison to save Sanji, and we end on this beautifully tragic farewell. He's coughing, he's shaking, Sanji is crying, and Krieg drops the ominous, "If he survives," line. Then the Barati arc ends, and nothing. No funeral, no cover story, no confirmation, just silence. For years, fans slotted Jin into the dead category because the scene is framed as a sacrifice. But technically, he is not a fake death. Oda never stamps him with an explicit, "he died." The author leaves the door cracked open, then never walks back through it. Gin isn't Pell. He's a Schrodinger's side character, simultaneously alive and gone forever. Listen to me. East Blue is calibrating your expectations. It's telling you that if you don't see a body, if the story doesn't stop and process the loss, you should assume survival. Miraculous saves are the default. That training is intentional, and it's why the first real, permanent deaths in the Grand Line hit you in the teeth. The rules quietly change while you're still reading on autopilot. Which means the real problem isn't just Oda fakes deaths. It's that you were conditioned early on to mistrust every sad goodbye. And that sets up a brutal whiplash when we hit the first major infamous fake out. And the first time that pattern finally breaks. And the cruel part is that this conditioning doesn't happen during Marineford or Eni's lobby. It happens way earlier, when the story still feels soft and bloodless and safe. Enter Reverse Mountain. On paper, it's a goofy arc about a giant whale. In practice, Oda stages one of the most self-destructive acts in the entire series. Laboon is literally ramming his skull into the red line, over and over, trying to break through solid rock with his face. If this were a darker manga, every panel of that would read as a slow-motion suicide attempt. The framing is tragic, the music in the anime goes full funeral, and the adults in the room are just letting it happen. Here's the thing. No one dies. Not Laboon, not the crew, not Crocus. The stakes are presented as life or death, but the resolution is a paint job and a promise. Luffy scars Laboon's head with the Jolly Roger, swears they'll come back, and suddenly this violent, bloody behaviour is reframed as devotion. Oda takes an act that, in another series, would foreshadow a character's final collapse and instead uses it as proof of endurance. You think, oh, even when death is visually on the table, it's not really on the table. Then we roll straight into Whiskey Peak, where the story pretends it's done playing nice. A whole town full of Baroque works agents, a literal assassination festival, dozens of bounty hunters dogpiling the straw hats in their sleep. Zoro wakes up with blades at his throat, guns pointed at his head, and the choreography is brutal. Bodies fly, walls explode, people are slashed and knocked unconscious in droves. The camera is doing everything short of drawing toe tags. And again, 0 named deaths. Not one. The entire thing is staged as a massacre that somehow produces only hangovers and bandages. Oda leans hard on what I'd call death-adjacent staging. Extreme injuries, blood splatter, characters face down in pools of their own bodily fluids, motionless. If you showed those panels to someone out of context, they'd absolutely file them in the corpse category. But in this stage of the story, unconscious just means, see you next chapter. I need you to notice the pattern. Reverse Mountain and Whiskey Peak are Oda poking the electric fence. How far can the author push the illusion of lethality How much can he make you wince, flinch, and assume the worst, without actually crossing the line into on-screen death? We need to understand that this is intentional craft, not an accident. He's calibrating your expectations, training an entire community of pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast every time someone falls off a cliff. So when fans later scream, "Pell should have stayed dead," that outrage is sitting on top of this early training. This is not a sin. This is normal for weekly shonen storytelling under magazine constraints. Oda is learning what he can get away with. You're learning that the gun on the mantle might just be a water pistol. Except that illusion doesn't survive Alabasta. There, Oda finally pulls the trigger on his first infamous fake death, and the way he does it permanently breaks the trust he's been building here. Because in Alabasta, the body hits the ground, the bomb goes off, and you are absolutely certain you just watched someone die. Or did you? Hold that thought, because before we get to the bomb in Alabasta, Oda quietly runs a whole training arc in fake lethality on Drum and Little Garden. He spends dozens of chapters teaching you to fear the scale of the Grand Line, while very carefully not showing you what real, on-panel death actually looks like. And I need you to notice how surgical that restraint is. Go back to Little Garden. You've got dinosaurs getting their heads taken off, volcano-scale explosions, Brogy and Dory swinging weapons that could casually bisect a Sea King. Every ingredient screams, people are dying horribly here. But when does Oda actually let you watch someone die? He doesn't. The camera cuts away before the finishing blow. The giant's duel is framed as this eternal romanticized clash, but the casualties are always hypothetical, always off to the side. Here's the thing, in a normal battle manga, that island is a graveyard. You'd get panels of crushed marines, shredded fodder, something to cash the check those weapons are writing. Instead, what you get is tension without confirmation. We see blood, we see explosions, we do not see a corpse. That is not an accident. That is an author drawing a border around what he's willing to depict. Drum Island doubles down on this in a completely different register. Under Waypole, the civilians and doctors are threatened, exiled, starved of medical care. You are told explicitly that people suffered and presumably died because the one functioning medical system was dismantled. But again, where are the bodies? Where is the panel of a child who didn't make it through the winter? It's not there. The cruelty is a background texture, not an image. And this is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is, in fact, a very intentional category of storytelling choice. Oda uses off-screen casualties the way a horror movie uses sound design. You hear the scream in another room. You see the aftermath in the environment. But every named sympathetic character you've invested in miraculously makes it to the next chapter. Think about Luffy versus Waypole's forces in the snow. The Straw Hats are outmatched. They're freezing. Nami is dying of an illness, and the clock is ticking. But the fear you feel is about time and failure, not about Oda actually snapping the neck of a main character on page. You never genuinely think, oh, this is where Zoro's journey ends under a random drum soldier. Your pattern-seeking monkey brain still assumes plot armor for anyone with a name. Which is exactly why the Alabasta fake-out hits so hard. Drum and Little Garden train you to accept that the world is lethal in theory, but strangely bloodless in practice. Death is always over there, in the past, in the crowd, in the implied. Then, in Alabasta, Oda finally stages what looks like a real, heroic, on-screen sacrifice. And for once, he gives you the body, the explosion, the full visual grammar of death. Except, as we'll see, that was never the moment he chose to start killing people. It was the moment he chose to start lying to you about it on purpose. So we hit Alabasta, and Oda finally says, "Fine, you want a body? Here, have a body." Pell grabs the giant clock tower bomb. The timer is screaming down. The Straw Hats are scattered and the whole country is about to be vaporized. He transforms, wings out, hauls that thing into the sky while Vivi is begging anyone, everyone, to stop it. And then Oda does something very important. He lets the countdown finish. No cutaway. No gag. No immediate, ha ha, just kidding. The panel of the explosion is enormous. It eats the sky. You see the shockwave over Alabama, the whiteout flash, and then silence. After that, the story treats Pell as gone. We get mourning. We get the grave marker. We get the "he gave his life for this kingdom" rhetoric. The camera lingers on the survivors processing it. In terms of visual grammar, that's not maybe dead. That's a war movie finale. Here's the thing. In real time, readers absolutely bought it. Of course we did. The framing is heroic sacrifice 101. The author slows down the countdown to wring tension, has Pell explicitly say he'll protect the country with his life, and then follows through with the biggest explosion we've seen so far. There's no immediate undercutting. No, oh, he washed up on a shore panel tucked into the corner. For dozens of chapters, the community files Pell under our first big name good guy casualty. This is normal. This is how storytelling usually works. And then, hospital bed. Much, much later, we cut to Alabaster, and there he is, bandaged, alive, with a doctor basically going, "Wow, crazy he survived that, must have been the gods." And then we just move on. No deep mechanical explanation. No clever foreshadowing about bomb composition. No planned escape route that we missed. It lands as a shrug from the universe. I need you to understand how jarring that was if you weren't reading weekly. You went from funeral to, oh, never mind, with a single page turn. That's the birth of the Pell discourse. Overnight, Pell becomes shorthand for Oda is afraid to kill anyone. Remember, this is pre-Marineford. We haven't watched Ace or Whitebeard die yet. We don't have Odin, Yuzui, any of the later bodies. So fans start building this narrative that One Piece is bloodless, that no heroic sacrifice will ever actually stick. Every time a character goes down in a blaze of glory, someone posts Pell panels as a cautionary tale. By the definition we set up earlier, Pell is a textbook fake-out death. Oda clearly, intentionally wants you to think Pell dies in that moment. He deploys every tool of finality, cashes in the emotional check, and then reverses it later with essentially zero narrative cost. The plot of Alabaster doesn't hinge on Pell being dead or alive. The Kingdom's arc resolves either way. That's the problem. It trains you to read future deaths with the suspicion of a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. And we need to track how that suspicion mutates once Pell stops being an exception and starts being a template. So once you see Pell as a template, you start scanning Alabaster again and realizing, oh, this whole arc is marinated in death-adjacent framing. Pell is the loud one, the meme. But he's sitting in a graveyard of almost deaths and implied body counts that the story never cashes out. Start with Cobra. This man spends the entire back half of Alabaster doing his best impression of a guy whose life bar is permanently at 3%. He's coughing up blood, getting shot, buried in rubble, dragged through the palace as Crocodile monologues about wiping the country off the map. There are panels where he's sprawled on the floor, eyes half-lidded, and if you showed those to someone out of context, they would absolutely file him under tragic dead king. And yet, he walks out of the arc. Not unscathed, not untouched, but narratively fine. The author frames him as mortally imperiled over and over, then quietly shelves the consequence. Then you've got Vivi, who weaponizes the same aesthetic without ever crossing the line. Her whole stance in the climax is, I'll stay here. I'll die with this country if I have to. The clock tower, the bomb, her screaming into the Den Mushi as the timer runs down. This is textbook heroic sacrifice staging. But listen to me. At no point does the story actually foreshadow Vivi's death in the strict, intentional sense. There's no gun on the mantle equivalent saying, she's doomed. It's all vibes. Emotional framing. The writing wants you to feel that she would die for alabaster, while being very careful never to truly threaten the princess the entire community loves. Now layer that over the Civil War itself. On the macro level, alabaster is a massacre. We see soldiers collapsing in droves, smoke choking the city, explosions ripping through streets. The narrative tells you thousands could die here. But when you zoom in, when you ask, okay, who actually died that I can name? The story gets real quiet. Random rebels, anonymous royal guards, background bodies. Almost no named sympathetic characters are confirmed dead on panel. It's carnage as a statistic, not as a cast. Here's the thing. That combination is where the dissonance starts to hum. One blatant, in-your-face fake-out with Pell. A king who keeps almost dying but never quite tips over. A princess who promises to stay and burn with her country, but is never actually on the chopping block. A war that should have a horrifying body count, rendered mostly through silhouettes and dust clouds. This is not a sin. This is normal shonen storytelling under magazine constraints, but it trains you. It conditions fans to treat death in one piece as a Schrödinger category. Simultaneously real for the nameless masses and reversible for anyone with a character sheet. And I need you to clock that pattern now, because Alabaster is not a one-off experiment. It's a prototype. The heroic sacrifice, the apparent death, the tasteful cutaway, and then 20, 200, 500 chapters later, a survival reveal slipped in almost apologetically. The question is, once you see that this dance starts here, what does it do to every death you read after? We need to go arc by arc and find out. So if Alabaster is the prototype, SCORECARD is the lab where Oda stress tests the whole system. He gets a closed ecosystem, a mad god with lightning, and a bunch of disposable-looking side characters, and suddenly he realizes, oh, I can kill people without ever drawing a body. Enter Pagaya. Connis's dad, the chill dials guy, the definition of nice NPC energy. When Enel drops God's judgment on him, the paneling is brutal. Flash of lightning, Pagaya mid-sentence, then he's gone. Connis screams, the camera lingers on the smoking spot, and the story treats it as a tragic loss. In that moment, the writing is not winking at you. The story is telling you, this man just died. Except, he didn't. Pagaya strolls back in later, singed but breathing, and the explanation is basically, yeah, Enel's lightning doesn't always kill. That's it. The earlier emotional beat you had, the gasp, the oh no, Connis's dad, retroactively downgraded to intense stun gun. And listen to me, this is not a sin. This is not bad storytelling. This is Oda discovering a new category of fake-out. Elemental execution that quietly converts into a non-lethal status effect whenever he feels like it. Here's the thing. Pagaya is just the cleanest example. Skypiea is full of God's judgment victims who are framed as dead, or at least very, very gone. Priests, random warriors, divine soldiers, Shandians. They get zapped, blasted off screen, dropped through clouds. You see the strike, you see the fall, and then the camera cuts away. In a weekly magazine, your brain fills in the corpse, because the author has given you all the visual shorthand for death without the one inconvenient panel of an actual body. Then, chapters later, a bunch of these people are just around, or they show up in reaction shots, or they're never clarified either way, which functionally does the same thing. It blurs the line between execution and knockout until God's judgment is less divine death sentence and more very dramatic taser. The community spends years arguing about who really died. And meanwhile, Oda has kept every door open. I need you to notice what that does to his toolkit. Skypiea refines a method Pell only hinted at. If you combine an elemental power, a big explosion cloud, and an off-screen fall, you can sell a death, harvest the emotion, and still keep the character on ice for a future return. No corpse, no funeral, no blood pooling on the ground. The author has not actually cashed the check. pattern interrupt for your brain. From this point on, every single panel lightning strike, fire blast, or boom cloud in one piece should trigger suspicion. We need to stop being pattern-seeking monkeys who see Jesus in toast every time someone vanishes in smoke. Because Oda is training you here. Skypiea is the arc that quietly teaches sharp readers. If the story can cut away from the body, it probably will. And once you internalize that, the fake deaths in the next sea get a lot easier to spot. Which, unfortunately for our blood pressure, is exactly what happens next. Which, unfortunately for our blood pressure, is exactly what happens next. Because the very next stop is Jaya, where death isn't a tragedy, it's slapstick. Jaya is Oda looking you dead in the eye and saying, "Oh, you thought that explosion meant anything? Watch this guy get turned into drywall dust and then stand up to complain about it. And listen to me, this is not a random tonal quirk. This is training. Take Bellamy's crew in Mocktown. Luffy and Zoro walk into that bar, refuse to laugh at the Sky Island is fake bit, and the whole room turns into a CTE convention. Heads slammed into tables, bodies folded into the floorboards, people hurled through windows with the kind of impact that, in any grounded story, would be a coroner's report, not a punchline. The bartender is not calling an ambulance. He's wiping the counter. Then later, Bellamy himself. One punch. One spring-loaded face-first meteor into solid stone. The panel sells it as a crater where a man used to be. In realistic storytelling, that's a corpse. In One Piece, it's a meme. He's not just alive, he's fine enough to come back in Dressrosa with upgraded trauma and a career change. The community turned that punch into a hype clip, not a eulogy, because the story frames it as humiliation, not execution. And right in the middle of all this cartoon violence, we meet Blackbeard. His introduction is a bar fight where he and Luffy are casually tanking absurd damage between bites of cherry pie. Cannonball-level hits, smashed furniture, zero concern. Then he delivers that speech about dreams never ending, and the author is telling you something very specific about his world. Pain is a currency, not a conclusion. Getting wrecked is a storytelling tool, not a death flag. Here's the thing. When people get launched through buildings and then wander off grumbling about their dignity, your brain adjusts. You start to put character survives ridiculous impact into the comedy category. This is normal. This is how serial storytelling conditions you. You stop asking, "Are they dead?" and start asking, "Okay, what's the gag?" So when Oda later draws a silhouette flying into the horizon, you've already been taught that the default answer is survivability. But then Skypiea happens. Suddenly, the same visual language, bodies fried, people plummeting from lethal heights, entire chunks of landscape erased by lightning, is being attached to a guy literally called God. The tonal elasticity snaps back. Is this another Bellamy moment, or are we in real danger now? The panels don't tell you by scale alone anymore, which means from this point forward, we need to stop treating big explosion as a category of death and start looking at framing and aftermath instead. Does the camera linger? Do we see a body? Does the narration eulogize or crack a joke? Because Oda has already proven in Jaya that impact is cheap. What matters is what the story does after the dust settles. And once you accept that, you can finally start sorting the fake-outs from the real exits in the next arcs, where the explosions get bigger, the cliffs get higher, and the line between gag survival and genuine loss gets very, very thin. And nowhere does that line wobble harder than Water 7, because this is the first time Oda points the camera at death, really stares at it, and then says, "What if I do everything except actually kill them?" We need to start with the ship. The Going Merry is the first real funeral in One Piece, not a gag burial, not a we thought you sank. An actual pyre, an actual eulogy, the crew crying on their knees while their home burns. And listen to me. That's not just sad ship content for AMVs. That is Oda running a controlled experiment. He gives the Merry dialogue a farewell speech, a literal apparition. He frames the boat as a person so he can kill it without tripping any magazine censors, and the emotional response from fans proves the point. You don't need a body count to make loss feel permanent. Here's the thing. While the Merry is dying beautifully, the humans are still playing in the fake-out sandbox. Iceberg's assassination attempt is staged as a straight murder mystery. Dark room, gunshot, blood on the sheets, Nico Robin framed as the killer. The arc spends chapters on who killed Iceberg, because the writing needs you to believe Oda finally pulled the trigger on a named ally. And then, he's just in critical condition, bandaged, grumpy, not remotely dead. The whole thing is a textbook example of Oda using the visual language of death, then yanking it away at the last second. Except buried under that bait and switch, he quietly slips in a real one. Tom, Frankie's mentor, is executed off-screen, in the past, in a flashback, and it's almost aggressively mundane. No lingering corpse shot, no dramatic last stand. Just the sea train leaving the station and the knowledge that Tom is not coming back. This is not a sin. This is normal long-form storytelling. You push the actual irreversible death into the backstory where you can calibrate the fallout, and then you echo that weight in the present with safer, reversible deaths. Meanwhile, the language of the arc is obsessed with erasure. The world government doesn't just arrest people, they erase them. Buster Call. O'Hara was wiped out. Spandam talks about killing Robin's past, destroying her name, voiding her existence from the record. We almost never see the bodies, but the vocabulary is genocidal. The threat is not "you will die." It's "you will never have existed in the community's memory," which from a thematic foreshadowing perspective is way more important for where the story is planned to go. And this is where the problem starts for later arcs. Because Water 7 proves the author can handle death thematically and symbolically. He can make a ship's funeral hit harder than most shonen character deaths. He can seed a quiet, off-screen execution that shapes Frankie forever. So when we get to Pell, to Pound, to the 1-0 clown car of non-deaths, you're not crazy for feeling cheated. You've already seen Oda do it right. I need you to hold that contrast in your head, because once we leave Eni's lobby, the fake-outs don't slow down. They escalate. So when we roll straight from Tom's execution and that train track trauma into Eni's lobby's Buster Call, your brain goes, oh, people are about to die for real. And on paper, it should. 5 vice admirals, 10 warships, an island that the government literally markets as "we erase this from the map when we're done." This is not subtle. This is the author pulling the fire alarm in the middle of the building. Except, here's the thing. When the smoke clears, almost every named person you care about is fine. Singed, bruised, emotionally devastated, but fine. Walk through the sequence with me. The Buster Call is triggered. The cannons start carving Eni's lobby into gravel, and Oda stages panel after panel that reads as lethal, poorly, and the galley lar workers clinging to half-destroyed ships in a crossfire that already vaporized stone towers. The Frankie family and the giants rowing a patched-together flotilla through a kill box of naval artillery. You're told this is a one-sided slaughter. You're shown spreads that scream, "Goodbye, background cast." And then, they just show up later, bandaged, mostly intact, with a one-line explanation. We barely made it through. Really. Through a bombardment that was framed as the same weapon that annihilated O'Hara. I need you to notice the category shift here. The writing is using the visual language of genocide to deliver the actual consequences of a rough boating accident. Now contrast that with Robin's flashback. Same institution. Same Buster Call, different storytelling category entirely. O'Hara is corpses in the water, scholars burning in the library, Saul frozen mid-scream. The camera lingers. The bodies are on panel. There is no cutaway. No, they washed up on a mysterious island cover story. The author wants you to file O'Hara under irreversible historical atrocity. So what's the difference? In the past, death is allowed to be permanent. In the present, death is a threat generator. O'Hara's Buster Call is treated as a war crime. Eney's Lobby's Buster Call is treated as a hype event that must look fatal without actually deleting the toys from the sandbox. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is, in fact, very intentional weekly storytelling. Because Eney's Lobby is the first time the series loudly promises mass death in real time and then quietly walks it back for almost everyone on screen. It teaches you a rule without ever stating it. Real, shown, named casualties belong in flashbacks. In the current timeline, the camera tends to flinch at the last second. We need to clock that, because it's foreshadowing in the structural sense. Listen to me. Once you see that pattern, history bleeds, the present cheats, you cannot unsee what happens at Marineford. And you definitely can't unsee what happens to a certain dead brother named Sabo. The problem is, Oda knows you're a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. So when he finally does kill someone on screen, how do you tell it's real? So, to answer that, we need to go to the one arc where death is everywhere, and somehow no one actually dies. Thriller Bark is Oda grabbing you by the shoulders and going, "You want corpses? Fine. Have an island made of them." Everything on Thriller Bark is death-coded. Graveyards, stitched up zombies, a giant skeleton warlord, an island that is literally a floating coffin. Every frame is screaming, "People died here!" But notice the sleight of hand. Almost all of those people are already dead before the Straw Hats arrive. The present timeline body count, functionally 0. Here's the thing. This arc is built on corpses, zombies, and stolen shadows, but the shadow mechanic is a cheat code. Gecko Moria can rip your shadow out, throw it into a corpse, create a walking horror show, and you don't die. You lose your shadow, you can't stand in sunlight, you suffer, but your heart is still beating. That is horror imagery without the narrative cost of actual murder. Take Luffy's shadow being stolen. On paper, the protagonist loses his shadow sounds existential. In practice, it's a timer. It's a structural tool to force a sunrise deadline, not a real execution. Then Oda escalates with the crew being drained to the brink of death by Moria and oars, bodies broken, faces sunken, everyone sprawled on the ground. It looks terminal. It reads as a massacre. And then, crucially, it isn't. And then you get Zoro's "nothing happened" moment. I need you to sit with how that's framed. Blood-soaked field, crucified swordsman silhouette, Sanji knocked out, Kuma standing over a man who has literally taken all of Luffy's pain and fatigue into his own body. If Oda ever wanted to kill a Straw Hat, this is the most aesthetically perfect opportunity in the entire story. But he doesn't. Zoro survives. The scene is death-shaped, death-flavoured, death-foreshadowing adjacent, but not death. Pattern interrupt. The scariest part of Thriller Bark isn't the zombies. It's Hogback. Hogback's experiments and Sindri's backstory are where the arc flirts with actual horror. Sindri is a real corpse. Her death is real, permanent, and it happened off-screen years ago. What we see now is a puppet wearing her face. The tragedy already occurred. We're just watching the desecration. Again, the author keeps the genuine, irreversible deaths in the past, safely quarantined in flashback, while the present tense action stays bloodless. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is Oda intentionally testing how far he can push horror tropes. Stitches, graves, vivisection, soul theft, while keeping the on-screen body count at essentially 0. It's death as aesthetic category, not death as consequence. And once you clock that, you start to see how One Piece weaponizes the idea of death more than the act itself. Thriller Bark trains the community to react to silhouettes, blood pools, and gravestones as if they're guarantees. So later, when Oda pulls a Pell or a Bon Clay or a Sabo, those fake-outs slide right past your defenses because your brain already accepted the visual language as proof. Which raises the real problem we have to solve next. If the visuals can't be trusted, what can? If the visuals can't be trusted, what can? Here's the thing. Right after Thriller Bark trains you to doubt every tombstone, Oda hard swaps genres on you at Sabaody and Marineford. The magic trick doesn't stop. It mutates. Sabaody is the first time he fakes something bigger than a death. He fakes an extinction event. Kuma doesn't just bop the straw hats away. The paneling sells it as total obliteration. One by one, your main cast gets erased. No bodies, no screams, just a horrible pop and empty space. It's framed as a party wipe. The community went, there's no way he just killed the entire crew, right? But you didn't have proof. You just had faith in genre and merchandising. And then, dozens of chapters later, we find out it was teleportation. Not a fake death. A fake massacre. That's a different category of problem. It's Oda stress testing your trust in the basic grammar of shonen storytelling. I need you to clock that escalation because it's intentional. He's showing you he can sell the image of absolute loss and then walk it back with a technicality. Which is exactly why Marineford hits so hard. Because suddenly the technicalities stop saving people. The war is Oda standing up in the back of the exam hall going, "You wanted stakes? Fine, have stakes. Named allies of Whitebeard drop. Random pirates get skewered on screen. Giants fall, commanders lose chunks of their faces, and the battlefield is a blender." For the first time, the background death isn't just scenery. It's a warning label that no, this time the gun on the mantelpiece is loaded. Ace is the proof. There is no ambiguity, no tasteful cutaway, no maybe the magma missed something vital. You see Akainu's fist go through him. You see the hole. You get the farewell speech, the collapsed body in Luffy's arms, the funeral, the grave. That entire sequence is Oda overcorrecting for every Pell-style complaint by giving you a death that is aggressively, almost spitefully irreversible. This is not a sin. This is not cruelty for its own sake. This is an author re-establishing the upper limit of what the story can do. Then he doubles down with Whitebeard. Body riddled with bullet holes, sword wounds, magma scars. Half a face gone. The standing corpse panel is theatrical, sure, but then we get confirmation. We get the grave. We get the ripple effect on the entire world. Whitebeard's death isn't a cliffhanger. It's a historical event. The writing treats it as a fixed point. And once you've seen Marineford, you can't unsee it. You know Oda is absolutely willing to kill beloved characters on screen, which means every later fake-out doesn't feel harmless anymore. It feels, to a lot of fans, closer to betrayal, because the gun can go off and you've watched it blow holes in people you cared about. Listen to me, this is fine. This is normal for long-form storytelling. But it means we need a new rulebook for separating the real deaths from the narrative cosplay. And that's where Oda's secret death rule starts to show up. And that's where Sabo walks in and punts Oda's secret rule straight into the sun. Because before we get to Pell, Pound and the 1-0 clown car of fake fatalities, we need to talk about the biggest retroactive survival in the series. I need you to remember that first Sabo flashback. Tiny Luffy, Tiny Ace, Tiny Sabo, the stolen treasure, the dream of piracy, the noble family he runs from. Then the boat, the celestial dragon ship, the cannon aimed straight at a child. We see the blast, the explosion swallowing the little dinghy, and the panel composition is very clear. This kid is gone. In universe, everyone treats it that way. The grey terminal fire, the nobles, the dragon ship, all of it collapses into a single Sabo died that day conclusion. Luffy's trauma is built on that assumption. The Seiki Cup scene works because you understand Luffy as someone who has already lost a brother once and is desperately clinging to the two he has left. That's why Ace's death hits so hard. It's not just losing Ace, it's losing the last surviving piece of that childhood promise. For years, fans and characters are on the same page. Sabo is a corpse we never saw. Here's the thing. That absence is doing double duty. On one level, it's censorship and weekly magazine reality. You don't actually show a celestial dragon turning a 10-year-old into paste. On another level, it's narrative wiggle room. No body, no funeral, no grave. Just a memory and a hat floating in the water. You can feel Oda leaving the door cracked, even if he hasn't decided whether he's ever walking back through it. Fast forward to Dressrosa, and suddenly that cracked door becomes a full-on Kool-Aid Man entrance. Sabo is alive. Not just alive, but Chief of Staff of the Revolutionary Army, second only to Dragon, casually dropping in to eat the Mira Mira no Mi and hug Luffy in the middle of a gladiator riot. That reveal isn't subtle. It's a pressure valve. After Marineford, this author knows he has taken Ace away permanently. So he uses Sabo as emotional restitution, a narrative refund policy where Luffy gets a brother back and the fire fruit returns to the family. So what category is this? It's not classic foreshadowing. Oda has never claimed he had Sabo fully planned from chapter 1, and the early execution doesn't read as a meticulously seeded time bomb. This is retroactive survival. The earlier death is an intentionally vague trauma event that can be reinterpreted once the author decides there's more story value in Sabo breathing than in Sabo burning. This is not a sin. This is normal for long-form writing. But Sabo's return quietly breaks the old frame of everyone Luffy loves dies and teaches the community a new habit. If we didn't see the body, maybe don't buy the casket. And once you've learned that lesson with a brother, what happens when Oda starts doing it with villains? So once Sabo teaches you no body, no casket, we need to go somewhere Oda absolutely does not play that game. Fishman Island's flashback. Because if present-day One Piece is Vegas, flashbacks are a cemetery. The house does not comp you a resurrection. Start with Fisher Tiger. Ambush on the way back from freeing slaves, Marines surrounding the ship, bullets in his body, and crucially, no doctor who can solve this with cartoon medicine. The crew begs him to take a human blood transfusion. He refuses. Not in a vague, maybe later way, but in a hard, ideological stance that is the whole point of the scene. He bleeds out on the deck in front of witnesses after a long, ugly conversation. And then, nothing. No cover story. No mysterious figure saved him. The story never even winks in the direction of survival. Here's the thing. That absence is intentional. The author is telling you this death is not a puzzle, it's a pillar. Fisher Tiger's body hits the ground so the current world can stand on the top of it. Queen Otohime gets the same treatment, and it's even more ritualized. Public square, crowded tension, the shot that echoes through the panel and her body collapsing in front of her people. We see the blood. We see the crying children. Then Oda slows down. Hospital bed, final words, the paper she protected burning in the background, funeral, shrine, national mourning. Every cultural marker of this person is gone, and the country will now be permanently shaped around that absence. There is zero ambiguity. You could show those pages to a medieval monk and he'd go, "Ah yes, that's a real death." Flashback deaths in One Piece almost never get reversed. That's not an accident, that's a category. Those deaths are used to define the present world's injustices, not to set up surprise survivals. Fisher Tiger and Otohime explain why Jinbei, Arlong, Hody, and even the random fishmen in the background feel the way they do. Their deaths are structural load-bearing beams in the storytelling, not Chekhov's CPR dummy. Contrast that with the present timeline, where Oda is way more willing to play possum. Pell's bomb, Pagaya's fall, the CP0 agent on Onigashima, Kinemon's definitely cut in half but also somehow fine situation. Those are framed as endpoints in the moment, but the panels are slippery. Off-screen explosions, smoke, silhouettes, no corpse. And then 3 arcs later, surprise, they're sipping tea in a cover story. This is not a sin. This is normal for weekly adventure writing. So listen to me. Understanding this split is crucial if you want to predict who's actually staying in the ground. Flashback deaths are sacred. Present deaths are negotiable. If a character dies in the now and the camera politely looks away, you have permission to be a pattern-seeking monkey seeing Jesus in toast and start calling survival. If they die in a fully staged flashback with a funeral and fallout baked into other characters' motivations. Stop digging. And once you see that, some of the supposedly dead names on the board start looking very different. And once you see that, some of the supposedly dead names on the board start looking very different. Which is exactly why Punk Hazard feels so weird. On paper, this island should be a mass grave. In practice, it's a Saturday morning cartoon where the laser always barely misses the hero. You watch Shinokuni roll in, Marines and pirates frozen mid-scream, turned into ash statues, and the author is clearly weaponizing your brain's worst-case scenario. That is chemical warfare imagery. That is, these men died horribly energy. But then you check the cast list. Smoker, fine. Toshigi, fine. The kids who should absolutely have permanent lung damage. Running around yelling, doing memes. The gas is staged as an extinction event. And then almost every named unit caught in it gets the narrative equivalent of an off-screen gas mask. Here's the thing. Oda wants the horror, not the bodies. He wants you to feel the foreshadowing of what the new world does to people without actually killing anyone you've emotionally invested in. I need you to notice how carefully that's planned. The ones we watch get engulfed are mostly faceless Marines, random Caesar goons, background pirates. They're props. They're the statues that tell you Shinokuni is real. So that when Smoker is swallowed by the same cloud, your stomach drops. The problem is, we've already established the category. No body, no named death, no funeral, no follow-through. So Smoker crawling out of the gas, hacking up exposition instead of blood? This is normal. And it's not just the poison. Punk Hazard is an island of explosions. The lab gets bombed, corridors collapse, the whole complex is rigged to blow. In any remotely realistic story, half the supporting cast should be pasted under the rubble. Here, those cave-ins and fireballs are time pressure mechanics. They're a countdown clock, not a guillotine. We need the writing to scream, "Run or you'll die," while the meta contract quietly whispers, "You're not actually going to die." That contradiction is intentional. The entire arc is about failed experiments, chopped up dragons, centaur abominations, literal rooms full of discarded bodies. Death is everywhere in the decor. It's in the kids' medical charts, in the abandoned research notes, in the samurai torso crawling around looking for its legs. The story keeps telling you, this is what the new world does to the weak, while very pointedly sparing anyone the community has had time to care about. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is Oda stress testing how far he can push the imagery without cashing the check. And listen to me, because this is the pattern interrupt. Punk Hazard is the rehearsal. That everyone miraculously escapes the island's destruction energy. That's about to be dialed up to 11. Dressrosa, Whole Cake Island, entire countries collapsing, bird cages and wedding cake explosions, and somehow the character graveyard barely grows. If Shinokuni is your first clue, the next arcs are the full thesis. So when we hit Dressrosa and Oda drops the birdcage, on paper, this should be the moment the series finally cashes the death checks it's been writing since Alabasta. You've got a giant wire blender descending over an entire country. Buildings are getting shaved in half. Streets are carved up. There are panels where you literally see the strings sweeping through crowds and Oda just cuts away. You hear screaming. You see silhouettes. You are absolutely meant to assume civilians are being turned into deli slices off screen. Except here's the thing. When the dust settles, when the birdcage rewinds and the final chapter of the arc does its little parade of survivors, how many named people from that entire siege are actually dead? You can count them on one hand, and most of those are villains or flashback ghosts who were never in the birdcage to begin with. The present day, on screen, this person you know and follow just died in Dressrosa body count is embarrassingly low for what is framed as a national genocide attempt. Look at who Oda dangles in front of that wire. Kairos is charging Diamante, bleeding, one leg, protecting Rebecca with his body. We get those panels composed to scream, "Noble last stand." The gladiators are strewn across the streets, exhausted, with the cage literally cutting toward their faces. The dwarves are collapsing from effort. Lines about giving their lives to push the birdcage back. Rebecca is seconds away from being forced to kill Viola. Every one of those scenarios is staged as lethal. Every one of them resolves with, actually, they're fine. No bodies, no funerals, just bandages and banquet tables. And then there's the toy curse, which is the most on-the-nose death metaphor Oda has ever written and still refuses to pay off with actual corpses. People are erased from memory. Their loved ones forget them. Their identities are stripped. Their histories wiped. Their existence reduced to a background prop. That is functionally death in storytelling terms. Then the curse breaks, and everyone pops back into reality and into everyone's hearts. It's resurrection without a grave. It's an entire category of symbolic death that lets the author play with grief, loss, and restoration while keeping the ledger of literal fatalities at almost zero. And listen to me, this is not a sin. This is fine. Oda clearly made an intentional decision here. Aside from Scarlet in flashback, a couple of random Don Quixote executives, and the usual evil king gets toppled imagery, Dressrosa's actual named casualties are shockingly contained for an arc that visually sells itself as a massacre. The problem is the gap between what the panels imply and what the script is willing to confirm. We need to admit that by Dressrosa, Oda has fully discovered the spectacle of threatened mass death as a tool. He can crank tension to 11. He can draw horror movie spreads of a country being sliced to ribbons. And then he can walk away with clean hands because none of the toys stayed broken. And I need you to sit with that pattern, because once you see how the birdcage works, Whole Cake Island's exploding wedding and Wano's burning capital start to look very different. The next arcs aren't just repeating the trick, they're escalating it. And there's one death in particular that exposes the whole strategy. And Whole Cake is where that strategy stops being a magic trick and turns into a running bit. This is the arc where death in One Piece becomes Schrodinger's side character, both tragic sacrifice and future gag, until Oda opens the box 3 years later. Start with Pound. The man spends the entire arc being a discount Sanji dad, begging to see his daughters, and then, when he finally helps Chiffon and the fire tank crew escape, we get that execution. The axe swing, the clean vertical panel, Pound on his knees, the weapon coming down, no comedy, no bonk sound effect. Then a cutaway. The story moves on as if he died. No one mourns him because no one even knows he existed, which is its own kind of cruel. On first read, your brain fills in the gap. Of course he's dead. The composition is doing all the work a corpse shot would normally do. That panel is Oda turning the camera just enough that he can have his emotional cake without committing to the frosting. And at the time, most of the community filed it under minor but real casualty. Sad, efficient, done. Then, many chapters later, Pound just strolls back in through the cover stories, waving around a photo and going, "Hey, I lived. The tragic, unseen beheading becomes a long-delayed survival gag. And here's the thing, that retroactively tells you the original death was never a death. It was an intentionally ambiguous blow, parked in that category of, we can always walk this back in a cover if I feel like it. Pedro is the same mechanism, cranked up to 11. His explosion is framed as the big, heroic self-sacrifice that lets the Sonny escape. He lights the bombs, he smiles, he quotes Roger, massive blast, everyone screams. But again, no body, smoke, debris, reaction shots. And then the plot sprints forward because we have to get to the 1,000 Sonny chase. So now you have years of fandom discourse where half the fans are going, he blew himself up, obviously he's dead, and the other half are doing forensic analysis on panel angles, arguing that if Pell can tank a nuke, Pedro can walk off some TNT. The problem isn't that people are in denial. This is normal. The problem is that Whole Cake has trained you not to trust what the frame implies unless the author nails the coffin shut. We need to underline this. Whole Cake leans hard on off-screen or obscured lethal blows. Pound, Pedro, the Vinsmokes under the candy wall, even Big Mom's own childhood flashback. The arc is built on cutting away at the exact moment of impact. This is not a sin. This is fine. This is how weekly cliffhanger storytelling works. But by stacking so many maybe deaths in one place, Oda accidentally recalibrates the audience. After Whole Cake, a huge chunk of readers quietly adopt a new rule. No body, no funeral, no death. Period. And once that rule is in your head, Wano's burning castle, falling scabbards and Hydra heads don't feel tragic. They feel procedural. You're not asking who died. You're asking who's getting the Pound treatment and who's getting the Pedro. Which is exactly where this starts to bite him. Because when you hit Wano, the fake-out economy goes into hyperinflation, and one death in particular becomes the poster child for why fans stop buying any of it. And that Pound treatment line is where we need to talk about the graveyard, where the corpses get up and start doing errands. The cover stories. Listen to me. If you're only reading tankobon volumes or binging on scans, and you're skipping the little comedy strips on the front of each chapter, you are literally missing an entire resurrection mechanic. Cover serials are Oda's side channel patch notes. That's where Hachi crawls out of irrelevance, where Caribou suddenly matters to the revolutionaries, where Pound just stands up and dusts himself off. Here's the thing, Pound does not survive Big Mom's axe in the main narrative. In Whole Cake, the emotional beat is crystal clear. He waves goodbye to his daughters, he gets cut down, we move on. The panelling, the reactions, the pacing, everything is framed as a tragic end. If you close the volume there, you would reasonably file him under dead, surprisingly affecting gag character, and go about your day. Except then, months later, buried in a cover serial about Baig's crew, Pound is casually shown alive. No big speech, no in-story explanation, just, surprise, that guy lived. The author has effectively retconned a death, but only for the subset of fans diligent enough to track the covers. Everyone else? They're walking around the community arguing about whether Pound's sacrifice meant anything, not realizing the debate has already been silently invalidated. This is where you get a two-tier fandom. On one tier, you've got readers who treat the cover stories as canon side chapters, who know Hachi survived Arlong Park because we literally watch him run a takoyaki stand, who know Caribou's grandma and the revolutionaries exist because the covers told them. On the other tier, you've got people who think those characters vanished into the same off-screen void as Jin. Same panels, same death, completely different understanding of the story. And this is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is in fact how Oda solves a very specific problem. He wants the emotional punch of a death scene in the weekly experience, but he also wants the long-term utility of keeping the piece on the board. So he quarantines the correction. The main story never has to walk back the tears you shed. The quiet resurrection happens in the margins where it won't disrupt the original beat. I need you to notice how intentional that category is. Cover stories are his favourite tool for soft retcons. You don't redraw the chapter. You don't add a narrator box that says, actually he lived. You just have Pound show up on a random Tuesday and now he's canonically alive. Pattern interrupt. This is why you cannot talk about fake deaths in one piece without talking about covers. Because several of the people I'm going to flag later as probably breathing are exactly the sort of mid-tier weirdos who could stroll back in on a cover page while the fandom blinks and misses it, which is exactly why early 1.0 hits you in the face. Because before Oda starts handing out survivals like coupons, he reminds you what an actual one-piece death looks like. Yasui's execution is textbook "this guy is gone" storytelling. Public square. Tied up. Broadcast to the whole country. He isn't in a collapsing building or some off-screen explosion. He is front and center on the stage. He cracks jokes. He trashes Orochi. He turns the entire fake rebellion symbol into a planned trolling operation. And then the guns fire. We see the impact. We see the body slump and hang there. Later, we don't just cut away and forget. We get the funeral. We get Toko screaming. We get the gravesite. Those are all the real death markers Oda usually avoids when he's keeping his options open. Here's the thing. Yasui doesn't even have plot armor incentives. He's not a straw hat. He's not a marketable villain. There's no toy line. So when the author spends that much panel time on the execution, then follows it with mourning, the community reads that as intentional finality. This isn't Pell drifting out of a mushroom cloud. This is a man shot on camera and then buried on camera. Very different category. And then Odin. I need you to remember how obscene that flashback is on a weekly schedule. The boiling isn't symbolic, it's literal. We watch him stand there in that pot, carrying 9 grown men on a plank, while the clock ticks down. There's no tasteful cut to birds flying over Wano. We sit in it, we watch the skin peel, the muscles give out, the desperation on the Akazaya's faces. When the time is up, they shoot him. We see the bullets hit, we see the body fall. 20 years later, his death is still the central trauma structuring the entire country. That's the key difference. Odin's execution doesn't just hurt emotionally, it reorders history. Every rebellion, every act of resistance, every open the borders speech is standing on that corpse. Oda never undercuts it with a gag, never slips in a maybe he swam away. The writing commits. The storytelling says, this is the cost. So at this point in Wano, fans had every reason to believe Oda was serious about death again. After Whole Cake's Pound situation and the Jinbei Drink and Hope cliffhanger, a lot of us were pattern-seeking monkeys seeing Jesus in every ambiguous panel. But Yasui and Odin are not ambiguous. They are brutal, final, and structurally central, which makes what happens next so much more chaotic. Because once Oda has re-established, very intentionally, that the gun can and will go off, he then spends acts 2 and 3 firing blanks all over the place. Kinemon, Kanjuro, Orochi, even a random CP0 guy. People die on Friday and stroll in on Sunday, and the whiplash that creates is not an accident. It's a pattern we need to talk about. Because when you put Yasui and Odin next to what comes later, you start to see a different problem entirely. Because when you put Yasui and Odin next to what comes later, you start to see a different problem entirely. And nowhere is that clearer than with Wano's favourite cockroach, Kurozumi Orochi. I need you to sit with Orochi's track record for a second. He dies 3 times. First, the Kaido beheading in the banquet hall. Then, the apparent burning in the collapsing castle. Finally, the post-fire decapitation by Denjiro while Hiyori watches him die. 3 separate exits for one cartoon snake politician. This is not a sin, but it is a pattern. That first beheading? That scene is framed as lethal, period. Kaido walks up mid-speech, swings the kanabo, and Orochi's head is on the floor before your brain has even processed the panel. No cutaway, no coy silhouette, no narrator box saying, "or so they thought." The storytelling grammar is, this man is done. If you tell me on that Friday that you were already confidently predicting Yamata no Orochi extra lives, you are either lying or you are a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. Then, for a while, the story behaves as if he's dead. The alliance moves on. The narrative focus shifts to the raid. When Orochi later shows up again, cackling in the depths of the castle, the explanation finally drops. His mythical Zoan gives him multiple heads, multiple lives. Retroactively, the beheading stops being a fake-out and instead becomes a power reveal. The author can point and say, "See, it was planned, it's his fruit." And on a technical, in-universe level, this is fine. Here's the thing though, your brain doesn't file it under power reveal. Your brain files it under, "oh, we're doing this now." Because by the time we hit the second sequence, with Orochi apparently burning in the castle inferno, we've already been trained that death is flexible in 1-0. He's engulfed in flames. The building is collapsing. Characters react as if he's finished. And yet, there's just enough ambiguity that when he slithers out again, you're not shocked, you're tired. The final death tries very hard to slam the door. Orochi, half-burned, lunges at Hiyori in his last surviving head. The fire has already done the "maybe this killed him" routine, and then Denjiro appears and decapitates him again. Clean, deliberate, with Hiyori delivering the "Kurazumi were born to burn" line. The camera lingers. The narrative treats this as definitive. No heads left. No cutaway. This is supposed to be the real one. But by that point, the damage to trust is already done. Orochi's case has an in-universe explanation. The extra lives are intentional, planned, mythologically grounded. And yet, stacked on top of Kinemon and Kanjuro and the CP0 agent, it still feeds the feeling that Wano is playing too loosely with death signals. We need to separate "can I explain this with lore" from "did this erode my confidence in the story's promises?" Those are not the same category. Because once you train readers that even a beheading isn't a reliable endpoint, what happens when you try to sell a real, permanent loss in the same arc? That's the next problem we have to walk through. So when I say Wano trained you not to believe in death, I'm not being dramatic. I'm just pointing at the Akazaya 9 and going, there, and that's the syllabus. Kinemon and Kiku are basically a crash course in how to burn through every death flag you have and still walk away. Start with Kinemon and Kaido's Kanabo. That panel is framed as a kill. Big dramatic strike. Kinemon, on the ground, motionless, eyes shaded. Everyone reacting in horror. In weekly reading, that's not "he's hurt." That's, "oh, Oda finally did it." Then we cut away. No immediate follow-up, no gag, nothing to soften it. The author is using every visual convention of a lethal blow, and you, as a reader trained on Ace and Odin, fill in the rest. Then we come back, and he's alive. Barely, but alive. You breathe out, you rationalize it. You go, okay, strong samurai, internal bleeding, this is fine. And then, because apparently we hadn't maxed out the credit card, we get the law surgery body split. Kinemon literally bisected, talking from his torso while his legs run around. At first that's played straight. People think he's dead again. The gag only lands after the shock. Here's the thing. That's two separate "this man is done" moments in one arc. Both walked back. Kiku gets the same treatment. First, the arm. Big sacrifice beat. The panel lingers on the severed limb falling. Everyone screaming her name. That's a maiming, not a death. But it's clearly coded as "she paid a permanent price." Then on the roof, Kaido impales her. We get the skewered silhouette, the falling body, the horrified reaction shots. No heartbeat monitor, no cut to a medic, just the visual grammar of a fatal stab. And then many chapters later, she's propped up in a bed, bandaged, still with us. Again, this is not a sin, this is normal shonen battlefield logic, but stack this densely, it stops reading as tension and starts reading as a pattern. Add Ashura Doji's explosion. Masked fake Oden, bomb reveal, Ashura tackles him out the window. Massive blast, body falling. That is framed as a heroic death. The problem is, by that point, fans are already side-eyeing the panel, waiting for the actually he pulled through confirmation, because we've been trained. Denjiro just vanishes for long stretches, off-screened in a way that nudges you toward, did Oda quietly kill him? And then casually reappears. You can feel the story flirting with the idea of thinning the Akazaya, then repeatedly pulling the punch. Listen to me. When you run "they're dead, just kidding" this many times in such a compressed section of the story, the category in your brain labelled Akazaya in danger gets downgraded to Saturday morning cartoon peril. You stop believing the knives are sharp, and once that happens, any future panel of a bleeding scabbard is just a scheduling question. Okay, when does Oda show them recovering in a futon? I need you to hold on to that exhaustion, because the next set of fake-outs doesn't just bend tension, it starts rewriting how fans read every so-called sacrifice in the series. And nobody embodies that exhaustion better than Kanjuro, the man who dies and dies and dies again. Because if Pell is the poster child for he should have stayed dead, Kanjuro is the poster child for wait, didn't this dude already die 3 chapters ago? He isn't just a traitor. He's a recurring error message in 1.0 storytelling. Every time you think the program has finally crashed, he pops up with another final act. Let's track this in slow motion, because the pattern matters. First, we get the reveal. Kanjuro as the Kurozumi mole, the traitor who has been feeding Orochi intel since the flashback days. Massive emotional betrayal, huge community reaction, all very intentional. Then we cycle through confrontations. He kidnaps Momonosuke. He draws those grotesque ink monsters. He clashes with the scabbards on the rooftop. Eventually, he's defeated, slashed down, falling from Onigashima. Wide panel, body dropping into the clouds, everyone reacting. That reads as closure. In any other story, that's the curtain call. Except here's the thing. It isn't. Because chapters later, when you've mentally filed him away in the handled category, he staggers back onto the stage, mortally wounded, body half charred, literally dragging himself through the corridors, still in actor mode. He delivers that final performance with the flaming Kurozumi drawing, the burning ghost kabuki that threatens to take everyone down with him. It's theatrical, it's thematically on brand, and it's also the point where a lot of fans went, okay, how many encores does this man get? Now, I need you to look at how Oda frames that last scene. This is where the foreshadowing conversation turns into a paneling conversation. When Yasui dies, we get ritual, execution, crowd, aftermath, corpse, mourning. When Oden dies, we get the boiling, the shot of the body, the symbolic closure. With Kanjuro, we get him collapsed, eyes shadowed, body on the floor next to his own fire demon. It is framed as lifeless, but we never get that ceremonial checkbox sequence that screams, yes, the author has signed the death certificate. No funeral, no grave, no explicit confirmation. Pattern interrupt. Am I telling you Kanjuro is secretly alive and sipping tea on some cover story island? No. Calm down, pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in toast. We need to separate categories. The earlier falls, the rooftop defeat, the surely he's done now moments. Those are fake-outs. Those are weaponized ambiguity to keep the traitor piece in play. The final collapse with the flaming Kurozumi. That's almost certainly the real death. In intent, if not in on-screen paperwork. His entire personality is performance, so of course his demise is structured as multiple last acts. This is not a sin. Thematically, it's actually elegant. But stacked on top of Pell, Kinemon, Orochi and the rest, it feeds that fake-out fatigue where you stop trusting any panel that doesn't show a body cooling. And once you've been burned by Kanjuro's curtain calls, you start asking a dangerous question. Who else in Wano actually stayed dead? So when you start asking who actually stayed dead, your brain very quickly slams into Wano's final boss rush. Because if Kanjuro can curtain call 3 times, what do we do with the CP0 agent who hard intercepts Gear 5's finisher and gets atomized by Kaido for his trouble? That panel is brutal. Kaido swings, the flower petals go black, the guy's hat flies, and he just vanishes into impact lines. No body, no name, no follow-up panel of a corpse cooling on the floor. The story treats it as a shocking interruption to Luffy's big moment, not as a capital D death. And here's the thing. In Oda's vocabulary, that difference matters. When he wants you to mourn, he lingers. When he doesn't, he cuts away. So where do we file that CP0 agent in our little death catalogue? I need you to see the problem. Functionally, he's dead. Dramatically, he's a sacrifice. But formally, in the writing, we never get the narrator, the characters, or even a tiny SBS blurb saying, yeah, he's gone. He exists in the Schrodinger's henchman category, both corpse and corporate asset until Oda opens the box. Then we get to the big two, Kaido and Big Mom. Drop straight into Wano's underfloor lava pit, followed by a volcano eruption that literally blows a hole through the island and shatters Onigashima's skull dome. Massive explosion, environmental damage, perfect final boss defeated imagery. And yet, no bodies, no graves, no funerals. The people of Wano celebrate, but nobody is standing in front of a Kaido tombstone saying, "We're finally free." Oda has a quiet rule the community has reverse engineered over 20 plus years. No body, no funeral, no death. Ace, Whitebeard, Odin, Yasui. When the author is serious, we get a corpse, we get mourning rituals, we get explicit confirmation in the text. With Kaido and Big Mom, the narrator never says the words. The Marines don't report Emperor Kaido deceased. Morgans doesn't print an obituary. For 2 of the most important antagonists in the entire story, that omission is intentional at minimum, suspicious at best. So fans do what fans do. We need to categorize. Half the community reads that magma explosion as the definitive end. The visual language is conclusive. The story needs to retire old villains to make space for Imu and the final war, and bringing them back would feel, to them, like turning One Piece into Looney Tunes. The other half points at Oda's habits, at the missing bodies, at Kaido's whole suicide hobby, and goes, listen to me, there is no way the world's strongest creature dies off screen in a lava bath and never gets a title card. You get theories that they'll crawl out in Elbaf, that Big Mom's homies shielded her, that Kaido's joy in death foreshadowing is actually endgame material, not a Wano payoff. This is not a sin, this is normal pattern-seeking monkey behaviour. But it does mean, in our catalogue, Kaido, Big Mom, and that CP0 agent can't be stamped as clean fake-outs or clean kills. They're unresolved, they're quantum. And the real problem is what that uncertainty does to the next death Oda shows you. So when you walk out of Wano with 3 Schrödinger corpses already on the spreadsheet and then you hit Egghead, your brain is primed to flinch. You see another sacrifice panel and your pattern-seeking monkey neurons start screaming, "Here we go again." And listen to me. Oda knows that. He is writing for the version of you that has already been burned by Pell, by Pound, by CP0 on the rooftop. Because Egghead wastes no time handing you the sequel, Lucci versus Gear 5, the rematch nobody asked for but everybody watched, and a CP0 agent dives in to stop them on Saturn's orders. We get the exact same visual grammar as Wano, foreboding orders, a close-up on the mask, the I understand beat, then the clash, the impact, the implied death. It's the rooftop all over again, just with a different wallpaper. Here's the thing. Is that framed as a real death? On the page, yes. In the meta, absolutely not. The panel composition screams noble sacrifice, but the aftermath is pure non-commitment. No body, no follow-up, no name to mourn. The story just hard cuts away, which is the weekly serialization version of the author shrugging and saying, "We'll see if I need this guy later." And that's the broader Egghead pattern. Vegapunk gets headshot, vaporized, beamed, you name it. The Seraphim are introduced as walking execution beams with child silhouettes. York orders massacres. Saturn is ripping people apart on panel. The language of the island is lethal. But the actual accounting? Almost no confirmed corpses, even when the framing screams, "This should be a bloodbath." We need to talk about how often Egghead resolves danger off-screen or off-panel. A beam fires, we cut away, and then characters reappear with a bandage and a one-liner. A giant explosion consumes a lab. And the next chapter, we're touring the rubble with 0 named casualties. This is not a sin. This is normal for a shonen magazine with broadcast-friendly violence. But it does mean that, structurally, death and death energy have been decoupled in the storytelling. And it's not random. It's systematized. Explosions, beams, silhouettes, smoke clouds, then an off-screen resolution. That's the visual foreshadowing of don't take this too seriously in late-game Oda. When he wants a real death, he lingers. He shows the body. He shows the reactions. On Egghead, he keeps hitting the first half of that sequence and then sprinting away before the camera can lock in. So no, this is not a Wano only problem. It's the house style now. Ambiguous survivals are baked into how he's pacing the endgame. And if you don't adjust your expectations here, the next arc is going to drive you insane. Because once you see that pattern on Egghead, you start looking backward and forward, and the entire catalogue of "they're totally dead this time" starts to collapse in your hands. And nowhere does it collapse faster than with the patron saint of "he died, just kidding," Bon Clay. Because if Pell is the poster child for unintentional comedy, Bon is the opposite. His deaths are staged, choreographed, weaponized melodrama. And the community is in on the bit. We don't riot when he lives. We cheer. We light a candle. We add another Saint's Day to the calendar. Go back to Alabaster. Bon Clay's first death is framed with almost insulting clarity. He stays behind on that tiny ship, facing an entire marine fleet, doing the whole "I'll hold them off, you go ahead" routine. The paneling slows down, the dialogue shifts into farewell mode, and Oda does the full, self-sacrificial last stand. You get the Den Mushi goodbye, the ship sailing away, the implied explosion. Structurally, that is a death. That is the author checking every box of a planned heroic exit. Except, he doesn't show you a body. He doesn't even show you explicit impact. And here's the thing. With Pell, that missing body felt like a problem. With Bon, it feels intentional, almost theatrical. It's the curtain dropping, not the camera cutting away. Then Impel Down happens and Oda just struts back on stage with him. No apology. No sheepish, "actually." Bon is alive in a hell prison, somehow more fabulous than ever. And instantly that Alabaster death retrofits itself into something else. Not a failure of stakes, but a survival that deepens his legend. He's not just a martyr. He's a martyr who refuses to stay martyred. The man is a recurring miracle. And because Oda is a menace, he runs the exact same play again. In Impel Down, Bond stays behind against Magellan so Luffy can escape. The setup is almost one-to-one. Farewell speech, emotional crescendo, explicit poison monster this time. It is framed as absolutely final. The author is daring you to say, okay, but surely he's dead now, right? Pattern interrupt. He is not. The cover stories and later reveals drop the punchline. Bond is alive in level 5.5, the secret New Karma paradise, literally crowned queen of the underworld drag prison. The man graduates from tragic sacrifice to running gag of noble deaths that never stick. Every time he dies, his myth inflates. Every time he reappears, the community just nods and says, yeah, of course he did. I need you to see the category difference here. Pell's survival undercuts a bomb. Bond's survivals reinforce a character archetype. One is an oops, the other is a bit. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is Oda using fake deaths as character branding. Because Bond Clay represents a different flavour of fake out. A ritual. We know the pattern now. He will swear himself to Luffy. He will make you cry. He will die. He will reappear in some corner of hell having founded a utopia. And this is fine. This is normal. The tension isn't, is he dead anymore? It's how insane will the comeback be? Which we need to keep in mind, because not every fake out gets that communal blessing. Some sit in a much messier grey zone. So let's stress test that pattern. Because when you say Oda always fakes deaths, the community immediately throws three names at your face. Pell, Pound, Pedro. These are the problem children. These are the cases where your internal death radar starts smoking. Start with Pell, because he's the cleanest specimen. In Alabasta, the author stages a textbook heroic sacrifice. The bomb is going to annihilate the capital. Pell grabs it, flies it into the sky. We get the big farewell panel, the tears, the explosion. In the moment, the framing is crystal clear. This is a death. Body obliterated, no corpse to show, but emotionally, the writing treats it as a funeral. Then, a few chapters later, he's just on a stretcher. No ritual, no grave, no long-term consequence. Crocodile's arc resolves the same way whether Pell lives or dies. That's why Pell is the poster child for intentional fake-out. The setup screams death. The payoff quietly whispers, anyway, he's fine. Now compare that to Pound. Whole Cake gives us an implied execution. You see oven swing, you see the blood splash off panel, you see Chiffon's reaction, no body, no funeral, no grave marker. In the moment, the category is different from Pell. It's not framed as a grand heroic sacrifice. It's framed as, well, that guy's done. Then months later, in a cover story, Oda just has him waddle back into frame, goofy as ever. That's not a tragic reversal. That's a gag. The joke is that you assume the obvious. The author weaponizes weekly cliffhanger culture and then resolves it in the most casual way possible. This is not a sin. This is normal for comedy manga, but it sits in a different corner of the fake-out map. Intentional, delayed, and played for laughs. Pedro is where your brain melts. Pedro blows himself up on the sunny to stop Perospero. We get the explosion, the missing body, the scarred Perospero as evidence. Later, we see a grave marker. The crew mourns. The story treats it as a ritual. And then, nothing. No cover story, no stretcher reveal, no explicit survival. On our body/funeral/ritual axis, Pedro is much closer to a real death than Pell or Pound. Yet the absence of a corpse, in an author who hates drawing corpses, keeps the door cracked open. So half the fandom is already pattern-seeking monkeys seeing Pedro in every mink silhouette. Here's the thing. Moment of framing versus aftermath handling is the whole difference. Pell, framed as death, Aftermath says, no stakes. Pound, framed as ambiguous. Aftermath says, it was a joke, calm down. Pedro, framed as death. Aftermath stays committed to the bit. So I need you to decide where you personally draw the line. Do you file Pell under bad fake-out, Pound under harmless gag, and Pedro under Schrodinger's pirate? Or do you go full hardline and say, no body, no death ever? This is fine. Whatever rule you choose is your reading tool. We need to test it though, so against even messier cases next. So now that you've picked your personal no body, no death religion, we need to weaponize it. Not for headcanon, for diagnostics. I want a little mental watch list in your brain of characters whose deaths never quite cleared Oda's usual checklist. Here's the thing. When Oda wants someone gone, he over-communicates. You get the corpse, the funeral, the grave, the narrator eulogy, the thematic send-off, the whole package. Ace, Whitebeard, Odin, Yasui. There is zero plausible deniability. Death is a plot point, not a puzzle. So our criteria for the still alive watch list is simply the inverse. No clear body, no proper mourning ritual, no narrator stamp, and a narrative role that still has open circuits later. Run that on Pedro, and suddenly the equation gets uncomfortable. We see the explosion, we see the sacrifice, we do not see a body. There's no grave, no the mink Pedro died here box, and the story still has unfinished business with the Roger Eyre regeneration and the Poneglyph hunters. Is he dead? Maybe. But structurally, he fits the category of Schrodinger's pirate way more than, say, Odin, whose death is welded shut. Same thing with Kaido and Big Mom. The magma pit is brutal, sure, but notice how aggressively off-screen that finality is. No charred corpses. No narrator declaration that the Yonko who ruled an era have fallen forever. We cut away, the story moves on, and the world reacts to their defeat, not their documented death. For an author this intentional about symbolic closure, that absence is loud. Are they coming back swinging? Not necessarily. But are they filed in the same folder as Ace? Absolutely not. Then you've got the CP0 agent at Wano who gets casually nuked by Kaido's blast. Again, no body, no follow-up, and CP0 as an organisation is clearly being foreshadowed as endgame players around Imu and the Gorosei. When the story still needs the category, secret world police with masks and deniability, individual members become modular. Killing that guy on screen would be cheap. Shelving him in ambiguity means Oda can quietly reassign the piece later. And this is where the cover stories and SBS answers start feeling less cute and more dangerous. Bon Clay's death in Impel Down is treated as a tragic curtain call, until a cover story, years later, frames him as the new queen of Newcomer Land. Pound's beheading turns into a gag reveal. Sabo's childhood death gets retroactively patched via memory loss. The author has trained us that background epilogues are where the long-shot survivals get confirmed, long after the weekly emotional hit has done its job. Listen to me. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is Oda using every serialized storytelling tool to get maximum weekly impact while still preserving chess pieces for his pre-written endgame. Our job isn't to scream plot hole every time. It's to notice which deaths he keeps legally reversible. Because if even one of these watchlist names strolls back into the main story, the entire community's death discourse resets to factory settings. And the scary part, Oda has already foreshadowed the one return that would blow the roof off everything we think we know about finality in One Piece. And listen to me, that one return isn't an accident. It's the logical endpoint of how Oda's been using death for 25 years. We need to stop treating each fake out as an isolated crime scene and start asking, why does this author keep staging murders he has no intention of committing? Here's the thing. One Piece is a weekly product before it's a finished book on your shelf. That means Oda is in the cliffhanger business. Kinemon got cut in half. Kanjuro's finally dead. Orochi's finally dead again. Those aren't just plot beats, they're marketing beats. You close jump on a panel of a silhouette bleeding out, and you spend 7 days in Discord therapy. That short-term hype is intentional. It keeps fans arguing, doom posting, coping, and crucially, buying next week's issue. Now put that next to the core tone of the series. This is not Attack on Titan. This is a goofy, sun god rubber boy sailing with his found family, powered by friendship, meat, and hope. Permanent death of allies hits way harder in that category of story. When Ace dies, the entire emotional atmosphere of the manga drops 10 degrees. When Oden dies, you feel the world lose colour. You cannot do that every other arc and still sell adventure to 12-year-olds. So Oda rationed real funerals and padded the rest with survivals. And there's a censorship problem baked in. Shonen Jump is for teenagers. Weekly, mainstream corporate teenagers. Oda has to show war, cruelty, genocide, slavery, public executions, the works, without turning every Wednesday into group trauma. So you get Pell carrying a nuke into the sky and somehow walking it off. You get Bon Clay's tearjerker sacrifices twice, and then a cut to level 5.5 where he's running a drag prison utopia. The violence is framed, then diffused. This is not a sin. This is normal for this demographic and this magazine. Fake deaths are how he has his cake and eats it. He can stage the big emotional crescendo, the sacrifice, the farewell, the tell Luffy I'm glad I met him, without permanently shrinking his toy box of beloved side characters. Pagaya survives Ini's lobby artillery. Sabo dies in a flashback so Luffy can have childhood grief, then comes back in Dressrosa to pay off foreshadowing and sell revolutionary hype. The story gets the catharsis, the world gets larger, and the cast remains merchandisable. But I need you to sit with the cost, because overuse doesn't just annoy a few Reddit threads. It rewires how you read. After Pell, after Pound, after Wano's revolving door of last stands, a panel of a character bleeding out no longer means death. It means temporary narrative parking. That's a tension problem. That's a trust problem. And the scary question hanging over the endgame is, when Oda finally needs you to believe a death again, will you? So here's where I need you to slow down, take that fake death's ruined One Piece sign, and actually read the fine print. Because when we say stakes, most of the community is secretly using a very narrow definition. Anyone can die at any time. That's one category of stakes. It is not the only one. It is not even the most important one in this specific story. Stakes are, does this battle permanently change something I care about? That can be a body, sure, but it can also be a relationship, a reputation, a political status quo, a dream. Losing a limb, losing a country, losing your faith in your captain. Those are stakes. A war can matter even if the main cast walks away breathing, because they don't walk away the same. Here's the thing. Even if you, hardened veteran of weekly spoilers, no longer believe Oda will kill most allies, the fights still bite. Marineford still shatters the balance of power. Dressrosa still crowns Luffy as an emperor-level threat in the eyes of the world. Wano still topples Tu Yonko and exposes Wano's borders. That's reputational and geopolitical damage. That's irreversible. You cannot unfollow Kaido's corpse from the news cycle. On the micro level, injuries and scars are doing work. Shanks losing his arm, Zoro's body turning into a roadmap of bad decisions, Law coughing up blood every other chapter. The author is telling you very intentionally that the story extracts a physical price. You don't need a morgue tag on every character sheet for the tension to be real. You just need to know the story will actually cash those checks somehow. And even with the fake outs, The emotions often stick. Bonclay is the perfect example. He dies in Alabaster. He dies again in Impel Down. We find out he's alive in level 5.5. He's a running gag at this point. But tell me that goodbye at the gates of justice didn't land. Tell me Luffy screaming as the doors close is suddenly retroactively hollow. It isn't. Because the stake in that scene isn't Bonclay's existence. It's Luffy has to abandon a friend to move forward. That emotional scar doesn't get undone by a cover story. Same with Sabo. His survival does not resurrect Ace. It doesn't unburn the brand on Luffy's chest or rewind Whitebeard's funeral. Sabo coming back as a new narrative move. He inherits Ace's will. He reframes the flashback. He deepens the Revolutionary Army. Ace's death is still the fixed point. Sabo is a planned orbit around it. But listen to me, some fake-outs absolutely kneecap their own scenes. Pell is the poster child. The bomb, the farewell, Vivi screaming. The writing is pushing, this is a one-way ticket. Then he strolls back in later with a few bandages and no real long-term role. That's not subversion. That's emotional charge with no bill. The sacrifice loses weight because the story treats it as a temporary inconvenience. So no, fake deaths do not automatically kill stakes. This is normal. This is fine. Stories have used apparent deaths forever. The problem is inconsistent application and overuse. When no body, no death quietly mutates into no funeral, no consequence, you stop trusting the threats, and the real question for the endgame is not just who dies, but whether Oda can prove to you on the page that consequences are back on the table. Because once that trust is gone, how do you restore it? You restore it by proving on the page that death still means something. And Oda has done that multiple times in ways the community still hasn't emotionally recovered from. Ace is the textbook example. The story doesn't cut away after the punch and spare you. It lingers. We sit with the body. We watch Luffy shut down. We see the Viva card burn to ash in a panel that might as well be a thesis statement on permanence. Then we get the funeral, the grave, the time-skip training that is literally built on that trauma. Ace doesn't come back as a secret twin or a cover story gag. He's gone. And the writing never flinches. Whitebeard is the same category of seriousness. The man dies standing sure, but the manga will not let you treat it as a cool wallpaper moment and move on. Oda catalogues the wounds, carves his message into Marineford, shows the corpse, and then spends the next decade exploring the power vacuum he leaves behind. Teach's rise, the Yonko reshuffle, the scramble for Whitebeard's territories. Those are long-term narrative consequences, not a weekly cliffhanger. Here's the thing. When Oda is serious, you always get the markers. Body on screen, explicit funerals or graves, ongoing fallout that keeps showing up in arcs that have no reason to reference that death unless it's structurally important. Kozuki Oden. We see the execution in brutal detail. We see the grave. 20 years of Wano's suffering are chained directly to that loss, and every single scabbard interaction is haunted by the gap he left. Yasui is a smaller character on paper, but the storytelling treats him with the same intentional weight. Public execution, body displayed, townspeople grieving, and then his death becomes a rallying point that literally shifts the rebellion's odds. The plot keys, those altered symbols, are paid for with a corpse the story never tries to walk back. And then there's the going merry. A ship, a boat, a piece of wood that gets a more explicit funeral than half the human cast in other shounen. We watch it burn. We get the goodbye speech. We see the Straw Hats sobbing as the mast collapses. No mysterious ship fragment drifting into a cover story. No, actually, Frankie rebuilt her off-screen. The grave is the ocean. Listen to me. This is why fans get so mad at Pell or Pound or whatever Wano was doing. Because they've seen Ace. They've seen Merry. They know the author can land a death with surgical precision. So when he swerves into cartoon immortality, it feels less Oda being Oda, and more a deliberate choice to dodge consequences. But the solution is not pretending he never fakes deaths. This is normal. This is not a sin. The solution is pattern recognition. We need to sort scenes into categories, the ones with bodies, funerals, and structural fallout, and the ones that cut away, hide the corpse, and conveniently forget to mourn. Once you start doing that, you can feel in real time when Oda is committing to a loss and when he's clearly setting up a reversal. And if you do that, something weird happens. The fake-outs stop hurting the real deaths. They start telegraphing them. Because when you know the rules, the next "this time it's real" isn't a betrayal. It's a countdown. And Oda has already started that clock for the endgame. And once you start hearing that countdown, something else ugly pops out of the mix. It's not just Oda gaming you. It's you gaming yourself. Because listen to me, we need to talk about the pattern-seeking monkey that lives in your skull. The same one that sees Jesus in toast, UFOs in every blurry cloud photo, and secret foreshadowing in every panel where a character blinks twice. That monkey does not turn off when you open a chapter of One Piece. If anything, weekly serialization feeds it protein shakes. Here's the thing. Our brains are wired to find patterns and assign meaning, even when the author didn't put any there. This is not a sin. This is normal. It's literally how you survive as a human. You see rustling grass. You assume predator. You don't get eaten. But in fandom, that survival feature turns into Jin coughed once in Barati, therefore he's 100% dead, and Oda faked it when he didn't show a grave. Go back and read those early discussions. Fans had a funeral for Gin off pure vibes. No body, no confirmation, no narrator box. Just, he walked off with Krieg and the atmosphere was sad, so clearly he died of poison off screen. Same thing with random Marines in Marineford, or background revolutionaries who fall into the ocean in a wide shot. A nameless guy, face down, in the water? R.I.P., he was my favourite. Oda's such a coward for reviving him. Reviving who? That man never had a name. What's happening there is fandom pareidolia. Seeing faces in clouds but for death flags. Every bandaged torso, every sad smile, every "I'll be going on ahead" becomes a foreshadowing siren. You start treating a character limping away off panel as an intentional death scene instead of what it often is: staging, blocking. The author moving pieces around so the camera can cut somewhere else. And this is where the category problem kicks in. People will yell another fake out at Oda for characters he never actually killed. Jin, never declared dead. Pagaya in Skypiea. We see him blasted, then nothing, until he turns up fine. Those background revolutionaries? The story never told you they were corpses. You told yourself that, then got mad when reality failed to cooperate with your headcanon. I need you to separate two sentences in your brain. I assumed they were dead, and the story told me they were dead. Those are not the same category of criticism. When Ace dies, the narrator, the art, the pacing, the aftermath, all conspire to make it unmistakable. That's intentional, planned storytelling. When a CP0 agent gets smacked by Kaido and vanishes for 50 chapters, that's ambiguity. If you promote ambiguity to confirmation, that's on you. And if we don't untangle that, the next section is going to sound harsher than it is, because we're about to look at the cases where Oda really does cross the line, and the ones where the community just hallucinated a funeral. So when I say the next section is going to sound harsher, I'm not just roasting Oda. I'm roasting you and me. Because here's the thing. Once you've decided Oda never kills anyone, your brain starts running a very specific piece of buggy software. That software is confirmation bias. In normal human terms, that's when you form a belief first, and then only notice the evidence that makes you feel smart for having that belief. You filter reality. You scroll past Ace, Whitebeard, Odin, Yasui. But Pell survives a nuke one time, and suddenly that's the skeleton key that explains the whole story. Pell becomes an anchor point. Pound standing up in whole cake becomes an anchor point. The 1-0 parade of he's dead, wait no he's not, with Kanjuro, Kinemon, Orochi becomes an entire anchor store in your mental mall. Once those are lodged in your head, every ambiguous panel after that is pre-labeled. You don't read it, you sort it into a category you already decided on. So when a CP0 agent gets one-shot by Kaido and vanishes off screen, you don't go, ambiguous, we'll see. You go, there it is again, Oda can't commit. When Sabo's backstory turns out to be a memory gap instead of a corpse, it's not a planned structural device, it's proof that death is banned by editorial decree. The examples stop being examples and start being propaganda. Listen to me. This is not a sin. This is normal. Your brain is a pattern-seeking monkey that sees Jesus in toast and Pell in every explosion. But once you walk into an arc already convinced the author is a coward, every non-lethal outcome feels personal. A character gets critically injured and survives because that was always the point of the scene. You don't experience they lived. You experience I got lied to again. At that stage, even legitimate survivals feel hostile. Law surviving Dressrosa, the scabbards crawling out of various disasters, Bon Clay refusing to actually die as a running gag. These become emotional jump scares. You open a chapter expecting a funeral, you get a bandage and a flashback, and you feel scammed. The storytelling didn't change. Your expectations did. And then the discourse goes feral. We need to talk about that. People start saying, no one dies in One Piece, as if that's empirically true, when our actual catalogue shows a very real body count. Fans throw Pell, Pound, and Kanjuro into the same category as Sabo's flashback, or Bon Clay's joke survivals, flattening every different kind of fake-out into one giant moral failure. If you push back and say, hold on, that one was clearly telegraphed as non-lethal, you're not disagreeing, you're coping. I need you to see how self-sustaining that loop is. Belief, selective evidence, stronger belief, more selective evidence. The more you feel betrayed, the more you hunt for betrayals, and the more any nuance in the writing gets sanded off. The only way out is exactly what we've been doing. Track the actual cases. Put Pell next to Ace, put Pound next to Odin. Separate gags from genuine emotional manipulation. Separate censorship workarounds from planned sacrifices, and argue from data instead of vibes. Because once you do that, something uncomfortable happens. Some of the worst betrayals turn out to be on us. And some of the ones you've been defending turn out to be way uglier than you remember. So now that we've established that some of the crimes are on us, we need to zoom out. Because there's this weird assumption in the community that Oda is uniquely evil for fake deaths, while other series are paragons of brutal consequence. And I need you to hear this very clearly. That is fan fiction. That is not what's on the page. Take Naruto. Kishimoto runs an entire multi-arc con based on identity and mortality. Obito is dead. Kakashi's trauma is built on that. The narrative foreshadowing leans you toward this noble grave. And then surprise, Toby pulls the mask off and it's the dead guy. On top of that, you have Edo Tensei casually reversing the funerals of half the cast. Characters we watched die. Meaningful deaths are now state-sponsored zombies delivering closure speeches on a timer. This is not a sin. This is normal battle shonen behavior under weekly pressure. Bleach? Bleach is the He's Back franchise. You stab a captain, he falls in slow motion, the soundtrack cries, fans write eulogies, and 3 volumes later, he walks out of the smoke with a new coat and a new form. The storytelling pattern is resurrection as escalation. Death becomes a costume change. Again, this is fine. This is a category of hype tool, not a moral failing. Dragon Ball doesn't even pretend. Toriyama installs literal Dragon Balls as a built-in undo button. Krillin dies, comes back. Goku dies, comes back. Entire planets get Thanos snapped and then wished back between commercial breaks. The foreshadowing isn't someone might die, it's someone is about to take a short vacation to other world. Fans accepted that system so hard that a death without revival feels more shocking than the reverse. So here's the thing. Fake outs and resurrections are not a One Piece specific problem. They are a structural feature of long-running shonen built on cliffhangers, magazine surveys, and the constant need to promise consequence without permanently deleting popular toys from the sandbox. Oda is playing in that same sandbox. He is not secretly writing Dostoevsky in a pirate hat. What makes Oda feel different is the tension between that genre reality and his intentional long-term planning. When he kills in flashbacks Nami's mum, Bellamere, Otterheim, Fisher Tiger, the story treats those deaths as sacred. When Ace, Whitebeard, Odin, Yasui die, the paneling, the aftermath, the way the world shifts all scream, this matters forever. So when Pell tanks a nuke and walks it off, or Kinemon survives being bisected, the whiplash is harsher. The same author who can write a funeral that haunts you for years is also deploying Saturday morning cartoon survivals. That contrast is the real problem. The fake-outs stand out more sharply precisely because One Piece often does take death seriously. You're not wrong to feel that difference. You're just mislabeling it as uniquely bad when it's really a clash between two modes of storytelling. So where does that leave Oda? Somewhere in the messy middle. He's neither the worst offender nor a saint. He's a battle shonen author making trade-offs in real time, under weekly deadlines, trying to balance planned endgame stakes with the commercial need to keep his toys alive. And if you want to understand his rules, not just his sins, we need to stop hand-wringing and actually map the pattern. So if we're going to map the pattern, we need a taxonomy. We need to stop screaming, ODA faked another death, as if every move belongs in the same bin. Because here's the thing, not all fake-outs are created equal. Some are harmless caffeine. Some are narrative war crimes. First category, harmless fake-outs. These are the is he down? Moments that resolve in a chapter or two. Zoro face-planting in Thriller Bark. Sanji apparently cooked by some new attack. Luffy sinking after a big punch and then gasping back onto the ship. The author is not actually pretending they died. The camera just cuts away at the worst angle. It's cheap tension, sure, but it's weekly magazine tension. This is normal. You don't lose trust in the story because Zoro stood back up after a spread where he was bleeding on the floor. Second category, noble sacrifice reversals. This is where the community really splits. A character throws themselves on the grenade. We cry, we salute. And then they're alive. Bon Clay at Impel Down is the purest example. The door closes. I am Mr. 2. The music swells, and you absolutely think he's done. Then later, he's a legend in level 5.5, thriving. Pound standing in front of Oven's attack. The panel layout screaming final moment, only for him to reappear in a cover story. These reversals can actually add to the myth. The survival becomes part of their absurd durability, their will. This is not a sin. It's emotional manipulation, but it's intentional, character-driven manipulation. Third category, stakes undermining fake-outs. This is where fans start throwing furniture. Pell is the mascot here. Alabasta builds an entire climax around a nuke-level bomb. Pell carries it into the sky. There's a grave. The narrative cost is enormous. And then, months later, he's in a hospital bed with some bandages and zero foreshadowing for why he's built different. That survival doesn't deepen his character or the theme. It just retroactively nerfs the bomb. Same complaint people have with Orochi's Hydra resurrections in Wano. Every decapitation that doesn't stick teaches you the story's threats are rubber swords. Fourth category, ambiguous survivals. Pedro is the poster child. We see the explosion. We see the sacrifice framing. But Oda very carefully withholds a body, a grave, or a clear narrator statement. That's not an accident. That's an intentional Schrodinger's mink state, where the community debates for years. Is he dead? Is he in some cover story we haven't seen yet? Sabo's childhood death also lived in this space until Dressrosa. Ambiguity doesn't feel as much like betrayal because the story never fully cashes the check in the first place. So I need you to actually sort every example we've covered into these buckets. Harmless, noble, stakes undermining, ambiguous. Once you do that, you realize your problem isn't Oda fakes deaths. Your problem is very specific categories of fake-outs. And if we can pin down which ones hurt the most, we can start predicting with disgusting pattern-seeking monkey precision which current corpses are actually staying dead. So now that your inner coroner has a tier list for fake deaths, we need to talk about survival. Not in the story, in your brain. Because if you keep reading future chapters with the same Pell ruined everything trauma, you're going to melt down on a weekly basis. Here's the thing, you need a default rule set. Not vibes, not Twitter consensus. Rules. Rule 1, clear body. Rule 2, funeral or equivalent ritual. Rule 3, grave or memorial that the story emotionally sits with. Rule 4, some form of narrator or author-level confirmation. Until you've checked at least one of those boxes, that death lives in the ambiguous category, no matter how many reaction panels Oda throws at you. That means Pell in Alabaster, no body, no funeral, cut away before impact. Schrodinger's bird. Kinemon getting sliced by Kaido, no lingering corpse, immediate cut to chaos, later patched up by Law. Schrodinger's samurai. You treat those cliffhangers as injury states the way you treat a black screen at the end of an episode. Unresolved, not resolved. I need you to start labeling certain panels in your head as Schrodinger's injuries. Off-screen explosions, long falls into the sea, elemental nukes that conveniently silhouette the victim instead of showing contact. Until the story comes back around and opens the box, that character is both dead and alive for you. Emotionally, you can gasp. Analytically, you do not file the paperwork. This is the separation I'm begging you to practice. You have two readers in your skull. There's the weekly you screaming, "He's dead," when Kanjuro gets theatrically skewered for the third time. And there's the pattern-reading goblin who has seen this author dodge corpses for 25 years. Both are allowed to exist. This is not a sin. This is normal. You can cry on Sunday and still, on Monday, say, "Hang on, no body, no grave, no narrator." Probationary death at best. Because when you don't separate those two, every survival feels like a betrayal of stakes instead of what it usually is. A very planned use of serialization tools. Weekly cliffhangers, magazine censorship, merch considerations, all that boring industrial storytelling stuff. If you turn every fake out into evidence that One Piece has zero tension, you're essentially yelling at a roller coaster for having safety rails. So, listen to me. Enjoy the drop and scream when the CP0 agent gets vaporized by Kaido's blast breath. Mourn when Sabo's boat explodes in a flashback. Then, when the chapter is over, put the scene through the rule set. Did we see a body? Did the story sit in the grief? Did the narrator weigh in? If not, you log it as to be determined and move on. And yes, some deaths will still blindside you. Ace did. Yasui did. Oden did. There will be at least one Straw Hat adjacent moment where Oda breaks his own visual habits on purpose. That's fine. That's healthy. The goal isn't to become a spoiler-proof robot. The goal is to not feel constantly conned by patterns that were visible the whole time, which raises the uncomfortable question. Given those patterns, who in the current manga is secretly sitting in the Schrödinger box right now? So here's where we need to be adults about this. You can't stare at that Schrödinger box and go, well, Oda's a hack now, or he's a flawless 4D chess god. Both of those takes are cop-outs. They let you stop thinking. And if you've watched this far, you clearly enjoy thinking about this series way too much to tap out now. Because listen to me, Oda is genuinely a long-term planner. That's not myth. That's on the page. The man is pre-writing major deaths years in advance. Quina, Bellamere, Noland, Otohime, Fisher Tiger, Odin, Yasui. Those flashback tragedies are structured, foreshadowed, and thematically loaded. Ace's execution is telegraphed from Alabasta onward. Whitebeard's death isn't just a shock. It's the culmination of everything Marineford is screaming about the old era collapsing. Those aren't oops, I guess he dies here moments. Those are decisions baked into the spine of the story. At the same time, he's absolutely an improviser. Sabo is the cleanest example. Introduced as a corpse in a flashback to explain Luffy's psychology, then retrofitted into a revolutionary fire god because Dressrosa needed an emotional accelerant. Bon Clay keeps dying as a gag and a promise. Cover story revivals, Gidatsu in the hot springs, Enel on the moon, Oda rummaging around in his own junk drawer and going, oh, this would be fun to reuse. This is not a sin. This is not bad writing. This is, in a weekly magazine grind, completely normal. And then there's the third category, Oda, the occasional liar. I say that with affection. This is the author who drops Pell on a nuke, shows you a grave, and then quietly parks him in a hospital bed next volume. Who lets Kanjuro, Kinemon, and Orochi all have multiple this is it for real scenes in Wano because the weekly cliffhanger economy demands blood, even when the annual volume reality does not. He will absolutely use death as a marketing tool. For you, for Jump, for the table of contents. That's part of the deal you signed when you started reading a battle shonen. Here's the thing. Appreciating One Piece means holding all three truths at once. Oda is a craftsman with a pre-written endgame, a juggler improvising in real time, and a showman who will pull a corpse out of a hat if it makes the audience scream. If you pretend he's only the planner, you excuse every sloppy fake-out as you just don't see the genius yet. If you pretend he's only winging it, you erase the mountain of intentional foreshadowing we've just walked through. So I need you to stay in the messy middle. Critique Pell. Side-eye pound. Roll your eyes when Kanjuro dies for the third time. That's healthy. But don't flatten that frustration into nothing is planned, and don't deify every coincidence as proof that Oda sketched Egghead during recess in elementary school. The real, more interesting problem is figuring out which deaths were on the whiteboard from day one, and which ones were born in the margins at 3 a.m. Because once you accept Oda as planner, improviser, and occasional liar, a new question opens up. How do you actually tell which is which on the page in real time? So let's talk about the bomb in the room. Because once you start sorting deaths into planned, improvised, and straight-up lies, you slam face first into the same wall the community has been ramming for 20 years. Pell. I need you to remember that scene with everything we know now. Alabasta is the first huge saga. We're told this bomb will wipe out the capital. We watch Pell, the guardian of the kingdom, carry it into the sky in what is framed, drawn, and scored as a classic heroic sacrifice. That is not ambiguous staging. That is not a cheeky gag. That is the author screaming, "This man is dead," in every visual language except literally writing the word dead on the page. And then hospital bed, bandages. Wow, good thing he was strong. No foreshadowing, no intentional out, no earlier category of, oh, this is a survival gag character. Just a hard reverse. That's why Pell became the symbol of odour won't kill, even though, objectively, he has killed people far more important. Pell is the first time a major, cinematic death got revoked so bluntly that even your pattern-seeking monkey brain, the one that sees Jesus in Toast and Gear 5 in Chapter 3, went, "Hold on, did I just get played?" Here's the thing. Timing matters. Pell happens before Marineford, before Ace, before Whitebeard's face literally explodes on panel. At that stage, Alabaster is our first proof of concept for serious stakes. So when Oda walks that back, it doesn't feel like a one-off misstep. It feels like a broken promise about what kind of story he's writing. We didn't have the later, brutally permanent deaths to balance the equation yet. All we had was bomb goes off, guy smiles, survives. And because fandom never lets anything go, we turn that bruise into vocabulary. People don't just say fake out death. They say pelled. That's wild. One Birdman in a turban has become shorthand for an entire category of storytelling decision. Memes of Pell standing next to Kinemon, Orochi, Pound, Pagaya, the CP0 guy from Wano. Those keep the wound fresh. The joke is funny. The joke is also a scar. But the more I catalogue these fake-outs, the more I think the intensity of Pell discourse is only partially about Pell. What really bothers fans is the fear that their emotions are being used as disposable hype fuel. You cry on Friday, you cheer on Sunday, and by Monday you realise the author cashed in your feelings for a weekly cliffhanger and moved on. This is not a sin. This is normal in serialised magazines. It still stings. So we need to put Pell in perspective. Bad decision? Sure. Tonal whiplash? Absolutely. Uniquely evil? Not even close. Compared to Salbo's planned dead in memory only, or Bon Clay's running martyrdom gag, or Wano's revolving door of got him this time for real, Pell is one early clumsy entry in a much bigger pattern. And once you see that pattern, the real question stops being, why did Pell live? And becomes something way more uncomfortable. And once you see that pattern, the real question stops being, why did Pell live? And becomes something way more uncomfortable. Which is, what does that mean for your guy? Because listen to me, you have a guy. Everybody in this community has at least one, they're totally alive hill they are fully prepared to die on. Pedro truthers. Gin enjoyers. Who have been in prison since Barity. People who will stare you dead in the eye and tell you Kaido swam to the Earth's core and is doing crunches with rocks right now. This is not a sin. This is normal. You read a weekly series for 20 plus years, you get attached, the author drops an ambiguous panel, and suddenly your brain turns into a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in Toast and Pedro in every cover story background. I get it. I do this too. But here's the thing. We need to run that attachment through the same cold framework we just used on Pell. So grab your favourite dead character. Literally picture them. Now walk them through the checklist. Did we see a clear, unambiguous body? Or did Oda cut away, silhouette it, or bury it under rubble and feelings? Was there a proper funeral, or wake, with the cast and the narrator treating it as settled fact? Ace style, Oden style, Yasui style? Did the narrator stamp it with that very formal he died language Oda saves for real endpoints? Or are we surviving on reaction faces and assumption? Then you hit the weirder categories. Any cover story activity that plausibly connects back to them. Or are you just drawing arrows between random background guys because the hat sort of matches? Any ongoing narrative role they would still serve if they walk back in the door tomorrow? Or would they just be hanging around, clogging up panel space and stealing payoff from the characters who already inherited their will? That's the difference between healthy speculation and pure denial. It would be cool if Pedro turned out to be alive because Wano teased Zoan awakenings and we never saw a body is speculation. It's grounded in patterns, in how this author actually handles foreshadowing and survival. Oda has to bring Pedro back, or whole cake is pointless, and the story is ruined, is denial. That's not analysis, that's bargaining. I need you to hear this. Hope is fine. Copium is fine. The problem is unexamined copium. If you're going to pin a red string board to your wall over gin, at least build it out of intentional choices in the writing, not pure vibes. So here's your homework. Drop in the comments which dead character you still believe is out there. And more importantly, why? Not because I love them, but because in this panel, in this chapter, Oda put them into this specific death category and didn't close the loop. Turn your coping mechanism into a tiny piece of literary criticism, because once you start doing that, something really uncomfortable happens again. You realize some of those hills you're ready to die on. Oda already buried them for real. So we've dug the graves, opened the coffins, and in a bunch of cases found out they were full of confetti and a gotcha note from Oda. Now, we need to talk about what this actually proves, and just as important, what it absolutely does not prove. Here's the thing. Concretely, we've built a map. We've got a full catalogue of major fake-outs, ambiguous survivals, and confirmed deaths, from Pell eating a nuke to Ace getting a hole punched through the thesis statement of the series. We've tracked the visual patterns, off-screen ends, no body on panel, silhouettes, the way cover stories quietly turn funerals into reunion tours. That's real. That's not headcanon. That's repeatable evidence. But if your brain is already sprinting to, cool, now we can predict every future death, I need you to slam the brakes. This is not a prophecy machine. This is not a sin detector for bad takes. All we've shown is what Oda has tended to do so far, under certain editorial pressures, in certain arcs, with certain characters. He is the author, He can wake up tomorrow and decide, actually, this time the off-screen fall into the ocean is permanent. He can break every pattern on purpose. So when you see someone go, no body, no death, therefore Kaido is 100% alive, cope, using this video as Exhibit A. No. That's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. Patterns are probabilities, not laws of physics. The difference matters, because the second you treat this catalogue as a rule book, you stop reading the actual panels and start doing astrology with splash pages. And listen to me. If you take this and swing it around in fandom wars as, see, you're wrong about everything, I watched a 2-hour YouTube essay. You have missed the entire point. I am not handing you a cudgel. I am handing you a spreadsheet with feelings. The goal is better conversations about storytelling, not victory laps where you teabag someone's headcanon on Twitter. Reasonable people can still disagree on the borderline cases. Pedro? You can argue his sacrifice is framed as final, or you can point to the missing body and Big Mom's absurd durability and say the door is cracked open. Kaido? You can read the magma bath as execution, or as Oda parking him off screen until the plot needs a dragon again. This is fine. This is normal. Some of those panels are intentionally fuzzy because ambiguity is part of the dramatic toolset. So what does this catalogue want to be when it grows up? A starting point, a baseline. When we argue, we can at least argue from the same pile of receipts. Here's how Oda has handled this category of death before. Here's the foreshadowing or lack thereof. Here's the precedent. It's not the final word on mortality in One Piece. It's the preface. And if we're going to use it well, we need to push one step further. Not just did they die, but why did Oda need them dead, or fake dead, for the story he's actually writing? Because that question changes everything about how you read the next death scene. So we have to retire one sentence from the fandom vocabulary. We need to put it in a little boat, push it out to sea, and set it on fire. That sentence is, Oda never kills anyone. Listen to me. That line is not just wrong, it's demonstrably, mathematically wrong. Ace is dead. Whitebeard is dead. Odin is dead. Yasui is dead. Whole islands worth of people in flashbacks are ash, dust, and conveniently censored silhouettes. You cannot look at Marineford, see a man with half his face blown off dying on his feet, and then tweet, "Stakes are dead," with a straight face. Here's the thing. When you say Oda never kills anyone, you're not actually describing the writing. You're describing your frustration with Pell, with Pagaya, with that CP0 agent who very clearly got lasered by God and then showed up in a stretcher. You're mashing all of that into one lazy category and calling it analysis. This is not a sin. This is normal. Pattern-seeking monkeys do this all the time. We see one fake out and suddenly every panel is Jesus in toast. A more accurate sentence, the one I need you to start using, is Oda is very selective about who he kills, when, and how publicly he confirms it. That framing actually matches the evidence. It makes room for both Ace and Pell in the same universe without having to pretend one of them didn't happen. Because once you say selective, you're admitting there's intent. The author is making a planned choice. Ace dies on panel in Luffy's arms with a branded Vivre card and a funeral and a world reaction. That is a confirmed, weaponized death, engineered to scar both the protagonist and the readers. Meanwhile, Bon Clay dies twice, gets a cover story, and is last seen ruling newcomer hell in Impel Down. That is an ongoing fake death gag. Same storytelling toolbox, different setting on the dial. This new mantra also respects the pain. It lets you say, Ace's death still hurts, and Wano's serial fake-outs annoyed me, without pretending they cancel each other out. You can hold Odin's boiling, Yasui's execution, and Kanjuro's third encore performance in your head at the same time. The problem isn't that death doesn't exist. The problem is that confirmation is a whole separate mechanic. And if we start talking this way, our conversations get sharper. Instead of stakes are dead, you can ask, is this a selective death or a selective fake-out? Instead of Oda will never kill X, you can ask, what would Oda gain from killing X, and how loudly would he need to say it? That's pattern-aware commentary. That's actually reading the text. If the community can update its vocabulary, we might finally escape the endless, shallow stakes are dead loop and move to the real question. What rules does he follow when he flips that switch? Because once you see those rules, some of the dead people you're mourning right now suddenly look very, very temporary. So let's zoom out. We've been crawling through panels for 2 hours, poking corpses with a stick, but what does the whole graveyard actually look like? We started in East Blue, where death is this hazy rumour. Queena's gone, but we never see a body. Jin coughs himself into a cliffhanger and just exits the story. Then Alabaster drops Pell, the human nuke, and the community collectively learns a new emotion. Oh, he's not actually going to kill them, is he? From there it escalates. Skypier's Pagaya falls into the harmless tension beat category. Marineford swings the pendulum hard the other way with Ace and Whitebeard, proving the author can and will ruin your week when it's planned. Then Dressrosa quietly exhumes Sabo. Whole cake layers on Pound and the Beige escape discourse. By the time we hit Wano's fake-out storm with Kanjuro, Kinemon, Orochi and the CP0 guy, you're not reading a war, you're reading a shell game. Here's the thing. There are rules in the chaos. Flashback deaths are sacred. Oda treats childhood graves and backstory massacres as fixed points. Present-day deaths? Negotiable. If someone dies in the current timeline, you immediately check for a corpse, a funeral, and whether the camera lingers. No body, no wake, no panel of people processing that loss. That death just filed its taxes under pending. And hovering over all of this are the cover stories, the quiet resurrection machine. Bon Clay bowing in Impel Down, then waltzing through level 5.5 later. Gadatsu running a hot spring. The morgue has a back door and it leads to a gag. So, when we saw everything, we get a taxonomy. You've got harmless tension beats, Pagaya, Pell, the "oh no, did they drown off screen?" moments that exist to juice a weekly cliffhanger and then reset. You've got noble sacrifice reversals. Bon Clay, Mr. 2, Pound, the characters who weaponize your tears and then send a postcard from the cover page. You've got the real problem category, the stakes-undermining cop-outs, where the story screams, "this is the cost," and then quietly refunds you later. And finally, the Schrödinger cases. People who are both dead and alive until Oda opens the box. Is Seibo's death a lie or a memory trick? Did Kanjuro die on attempt 3 or attempt 4? The ambiguity is intentional. The foreshadowing is that there is no closure yet. Listen to me. Both things are true. This author is fully capable of permanent, devastating, meticulously foreshadowed deaths, and he is absolutely guilty of cheap, weekly magazine fake-outs. This is not a sin. This is normal for serialized storytelling under deadline. But if you don't separate those categories, you end up screaming, "Stakes are dead," at a series that literally buried Ace, Whitebeard, Odin, and Yasui in front of you. And I need you to appreciate how deranged this project is. We just spent hours dissecting fictional mortality patterns as if we're doing forensic accounting on a pirate comic. Yet once you map every fake death, you can't unsee the rules, and it genuinely changes how you read One Piece going forward. Because here's the uncomfortable question. If we can predict who's safe from the graveyard, can we also predict who isn't? So here's where I hand the cursed spreadsheet over to you. If we can sketch out who's safe from the graveyard, we can also sketch out who never should have crawled back out of it. So I need you to go to the comments and pick one. One fake death you think Oda absolutely should have kept real. Pell, Pound, Pagaya, Kanjuro's third encore, whatever. But don't just name drop. Use the criteria we built. Did the death pay off existing foreshadowing? Did it resolve an arc? Did the survival undercut the theme? Was there any intentional setup for them to live? Treat it as a case file. Here's my victim. Here's the narrative purpose their death served. Here's the moment Oda reversed it. Here's why that breaks the internal rules we just mapped. If you're going to yell, "Pell should have stayed dead," you now have to argue it like a lawyer, not a pattern-seeking monkey who sees Jesus in every explosion panel. Second thing, I want your origin story. 1. At what exact moment did you stop trusting Oda's deaths? Was it Pell walking in during the Alabasta epilogue as if he didn't just tank a nuke? Was it Sabo reappearing in Dressrosa and retrofitting an entire childhood trauma into a memory gap device? Was it Wano, where Kanjuro, Orochi and Kinemon turned the concept of mortality into a revolving door gag? Or are you one of those hardened veterans who never believed anything after Mary? Tell me where your personal trust graph flatlined. Here's the thing. Once we map those "I stopped believing" points across a bunch of fans, we can actually see how different reading styles collide. Weekly readers, binge readers, anime only, they don't experience the same fake deaths the same way. This is not a sin. This is not bad fandom. This is normal. But if we want a better death discourse in this community, we need to understand where everybody's coming from. Also, I need you to weaponize this in a very specific, very loving way. You know that friend who posts "stakes are dead," Oda never kills anyone, under every panel with blood in it? Send them this video. Not as a dunk, not as a "shut up, you're wrong," but as an intervention. Hey, you clearly have feelings about this. Here's 3 hours of forensic storytelling analysis so you can complain with precision. If this does well, I'm absolutely doing follow-ups. Deep dives on specific characters' fates, retrying controversial cases with stricter criteria, or even taking this whole framework and applying it to another series that has a fake death addiction. You want a Seibo-only trial, a Bon Clay martyrdom special, a cross-examination of shonen authors' corpse policies, say so. Because listen to me, if you're going to say Oda lied to you, at least now you have the receipts. Go build your case in the comments, send this to the loudest corpse truthers in your group chat, and I'll see you in the next autopsy.